I'll confess that it's been very difficult for me to write this account, as I finally reveal my family's dark secret to the world. A few years ago, I would have never considered going public about the twisted collection that I inherited, painstakingly maintained, and added to for all my life. And to do so on an internet forum. I despise the World Wide Web and electronic books. Those soulless digital documents that are slowly strangling the life out of this business. I've devoted my existence to vintage titles, living for the smell of leather bindings and sorties to obscure bookshops and fairs in all corners of the world. This calling has dominated my life so completely that I've isolated myself from everybody else. I have no friends outside of my professional contacts. I never married or had kids, and all my family members are now deceased. I am the last in my line, and so I have nobody to leave my rare collection to after I die. No museum or library on the planet would wish to take on my back catalog, and I'm unwilling to put my family's collection up for sale. Oh, I know there are those who would pay anything to acquire certain books in my catalog, but these nefarious characters will never get their claws in my volumes. Honestly, I have come to detest my lifelong role as custodian of this devilish collection, and so I intend to burn several of my once cherished books before I take my last breath. Frankly, many of these texts should never have fallen into mortal hands, and so it's best they return to the fire from whence they came. But I digress. It's not my intention to tell my life story, which in any case would be of little interest to anybody out here. However, I feel it's necessary to reveal something of my family's dark history to provide context for the tales to come. Our most unusual collection was started by my great-grandfather sometime in the late 1800s. I know little about my ancestor other than that he was the unsavory youngest son of an English duke. Known for his wild and hedonistic ways, my ancestor was said to have a fling with a young serving girl who subsequently got pregnant. His father made discreet arrangements, forcing the girl to visit a backstreet abortionist. She didn't survive the procedure, though, and my great-grandfather was sent away in disgrace, receiving a comfortable allowance from his father on the condition that he never darkened the family's doors again. In the years that followed, my ancestor's life took an even darker turn as he indulged himself in a self-destructive binge of alcoholism, womanizing, and ultimately, an opium addiction that would be the death of him. It was at some point during his downward spiral that my great-grandfather developed yet another unhealthy and dangerous obsession, this one being in the occult. I don't know which book he acquired first or where he found it, but the story is that my ancestor was seeking to make a Faustian-type deal with the devil, trading his soul in exchange for earthly pleasures. I doubt he succeeded in his ill-advised venture, but that's how it started. His hellish collection grew in the years before his death, as he acquired rare and often banned works on occult rituals and paranormal occurrences originating from all corners of the globe. In between his book hunts and opium binges, my great-grandfather got yet another girl pregnant and became father to a son. I understand he played little to no role in my grandfather's upbringing, but he did write a will. But all the wretched man had left to bequeath upon his untimely death was his damned book collection. And so the tradition continued, although frankly it's more like a curse our family has had to live with for well over a century. You might ask how this hideous custom has been passed down through 4 generations. Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I was only 12 years old when my father took me aside and told me the secret his father had passed on to him. I almost laughed when I listened to my dad talking of books penned by demons, histories of human sacrifices, and field journals of cryptozoologists. Initially, I didn't believe a word of it. But then my old man took me to the basement vault where the ever-growing collection was held. I remember walking down the aisles and carefully lifting the ancient, leather-bound books under my father's strict supervision and delicately flicking through the pages, reading the words and absorbing the dark energy within them. That was how it began for me. I don't know how to explain it, but those books and their pages, they take a hold of you somehow, latching on to a darkness deep inside. Those words have a terrible power, and if you're not careful, they will eat you whole. The collection now consists of several hundred works of various descriptions. They are written in numerous different languages and emanate from countless cultures and civilizations. Some are centuries old, having been painstakingly written by ink and quill, while others are modern, mass-produced paperbacks. The catalog has grown substantially over the course of 4 generations, and I myself have added dozens of titles during the past few decades. Like the books I inherited from my ancestors, these works vary in age and content, but they all have something in common. Every book in my macabre catalog tells a story from a world beyond conventional human understanding, and each offers a glimpse into the dark abyss that exists on the edges of our all-too-fragile civilization. So, for what it's worth, that's my family's sordid history, providing a brief explanation of how this hellish catalog came to be in my possession. So, if you stuck with me this far, I guess you're hoping to learn the contents of what my family has come to call Hell's Library. Well, I must tell you, there are some works within my collection that I shall never transcribe, as their contents are simply too evil or too dangerous. As much as it pains me, those publications will end up on the bonfire. Nevertheless, I do intend to share extracts from several of my favorite works so I can preserve at least some of my family's dubious legacy. To begin, let me introduce you to The Secret Atlas by Diabolus. Now, before I begin with my excerpts, I will provide some context about this book. The Atlas is a relatively recent publication, originating at some point during the early years of the 21st century. It is written in English and first emerged in North America. Although there is no named publisher and the author's name is clearly an alias, there are likely less than a dozen copies still in existence, and I was fortunate enough to discover one in the back shelves of a New Orleans second-hand bookstore during the summer of 2010. The copy I own is hardback and nearly 500 pages in length. The Atlas does contain maps, but this is not its main appeal. What interests me is the secret locations it reveals to the reader, forgotten places with dark histories that have been erased from the history books. The anonymous author of this secret history has painstakingly researched and sourced these extraordinary and often terrifying stories and brought them to life through first-hand accounts. So now, I will share with you 4 stories I've selected from Diabolus's masterpiece of secret geography: a tragic tale of a noble woman's daughter, the last known inhabitant of a legendary phantom island, an account from foreign legionnaires stationed in a remote desert fortress assaulted by a hellish beast, a totalitarian prison camp where a dark ritual awakened an ancient evil, and finally, a town exposed to a terrible energy which allows it to shift in space and time. Chapter 1. The Isle of Demons, also known as Santiago or Santanese. Location: the North Atlantic, somewhere off the coast of Newfoundland, although in reality, this island does not appear on any modern map, and so is not believed to be literally located on our plane of existence. Category: Phantom Island, Legendary or Lost Island, Demonic or Supernatural Realm. Primary source: The Lost Diary of Emily de la Roque. Introduction: Diabolus. The story of the legendary Isle of Demons is hardly a secret, as accounts of this so-called Phantom Island appear in several historical texts. The isle began appearing on maps during the 16th century and was the subject of considerable speculation and fear amongst the early sailors traveling to the shores of North America. It was said that the island was inhabited by demons and wild beasts, dangerous creatures that would torment or attack any ships that passed the isle's coastline and devour anyone foolish enough to set foot on its shoreline. Early accounts described the barren island as being covered by thousands of screeching birds and populated by sea creatures as big as oxen, with teeth in their mouth like an elephant, and bears as big as a cow and white like a swan. It is highly likely that these vivid descriptions come from sightings of local wildlife, namely flocks of gannets, walruses, and polar bears. Other stories are harder to explain away, though. Accounts from French and Portuguese mariners spoke of low moans, guttural growls, and unnatural voices calling out whenever they approached the cursed shores of the dreaded island. And so the rumors persisted of a land ruled by demons that should be avoided by all mortal God-fearing men. But the Isle of Demons gained notoriety due to a now famous tale of love, tragedy, and betrayal. Marguerite de la Roque was a French noblewoman who set sail on board a small fleet of ships destined for Canada during the early 1540s. While on board, Marguerite entered into a passionate but illicit affair with a young officer. Unfortunately, their liaisons were discovered by the fleet's commander, who happened to be Marguerite's cruel and fundamentalist uncle, Sieur de Roberval. Angered at his niece's forbidden love, Roberval marooned the couple on the dreaded Isle of Demons, leaving them with meager supplies and a few weapons, muskets and gunpowder, but otherwise abandoning the ill-fated lovers to their fate. What followed was a battle for survival against the odds as Marguerite and her officer-lover faced not just the brutal elements, but also the dangerous wild beasts and of course the feared demons of legend. The polar bears were vulnerable to gunfire and steel, but the demons could not be slayed by any man-made weapons. When the dark entities emerged, the couple retreated to the small stone cottage they built in the island's center, where they maintained a constant fire to keep their supernatural attackers at bay. This much is well known, but what few realize is that Marguerite and her lover's tryst resulted in a child, a baby girl who was born on the cursed island and raised by her exiled parents. The girl was named Emily, and sadly, she had a very difficult life. True, she had two parents who loved her, but they were marooned on the cursed isle without hope of rescue, and so could not give their beloved daughter the life she deserved. Her existence was one of constant fear and an unending fight for survival. Some years ago, I acquired a manuscript purported to be Emily de la Roque's personal diary. Regrettably, I cannot reveal the identity of the individual who gave me this manuscript, as the person who found the long-lost diary swore me to secrecy. I understand it was found inside a bottle washed up on the east coast of Newfoundland, close to the claimed location of the island. I can say no more as to its origins, other than to confirm that I had the parchment carbon dated by a specialist who confirmed the manuscript is approximately 400 to 500 years old. That said, all accounts suggest that the earthly laws of time and space do not apply on the island. The only fact we know is that poor Emily is trapped in this hellish place, and sadly, her diary only confirms the constant torment the girl faces. The Diary of Emily de la Roque. The first day. I woke at dawn, feeling the icy cold as I crawled out from under my fur blanket and placed my bare feet on the dirt floor. I sighed in despair before making myself presentable and getting dressed. I walked to the front room and greeted my mother and father, who both sat by the fading fire, muskets still in hand as they finished their nightly watch. My parents looked exhausted, their faces pale and eyes sunken. Both smiled when they saw me, but I can tell they're only trying to reassure me. Sadly, I know the terrible truth. Every day, Mama and Papa grow weaker, and I fear they will be unable to continue the fight for much longer. But as always, I buried my fear as I went about my day. My parents rested while I left our home in sanctuary in search of firewood and food. I descended the barren rocks surrounding our stone cottage, observing the scars of last night's battle. It was bitterly cold, but I did my duties in relative safety. The huge white bears who inhabit parts of our island no longer approach our home, even in daylight. As vicious as the beasts are, they still fear to tread on the demon's turf. I shot down a gannet for our breakfast and gathered enough firewood to keep our fire burning for another night. By rights, I should have returned to our cabin, but I had a further task to complete, one that I must keep a secret. Proceeding to the rocky beach on the island's eastern side, I recovered the green glass bottle from its hiding place, my hand shaking as I carefully inserted the rolled up parchment inside. The letter I so carefully wrote the night before, putting my heart and soul into every word and sentence. I thought of my pen pal as I inserted the cork to secure my heartfelt letter inside the watertight bottle. His reply to my first letter has brought fresh hope to my dreary existence on this savage land, allowing me a glimpse of a world I hope to visit someday. After all these years of loneliness, I have finally made contact, finding a friend on the far side of the ocean. But I must keep our correspondence a secret. My parents would never approve. And then there's the matter of the demons who rule this land. It's dangerous to defy them, but I must take the risk. I cannot live like this any longer. I took a deep breath before lifting my arm and throwing the bottle with all my might, watching as it hit the water, bobbing on the surface before the current slowly swept it out to sea. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but they are tears of joy, because I feel elated at my small act of defiance, as my bottled message represents a lifeline, a chance for me to finally escape this hellish isle and seek companionship and happiness in a land far from here. Despite all the fear and horror, I still have hope in my heart. The second day. Last night was hell. The demons came with the storm as they always do. I could hear their devilish wailing carried by the wind and was instantly on alert, joining my parents in a desperate defense of our cabin. The battle was fierce and exhausting, but somehow we held the beasts off until dawn, but at considerable cost. Father is ill, as the stresses of the fight might have broken him. Papa is now confined to his bed, and I fear he will not last the week. Mother tries to stay strong for me, but I can tell she too is losing the will to fight. I experience a powerful mixture of emotions as seeing my parents' rapid decline, feeling sorrow, anger, and fear in equal measure. The correspondence with my pen pal is my only lifeline, a beacon of light in a sea of darkness. I read his latest letter again, noting the surprise in his words. He claims it has been years since he received my first letter, but for me it's only been a few short days. I suspect the normal rules of time don't apply on this cursed isle. This scares me, as my chances of escaping to the outside world seem to be fading. But I'm not inclined to give up, not yet. I'll confess that my latest letter has taken on a darker tone. I do not wish to cause my pen pal distress or to come across as a helpless damsel who needs a white knight to save her. Nevertheless, I must take this chance, as I fear my time is limited. So, shortly before dusk, I carefully sealed the parchment inside of the green glass bottle and tossed it out into the cold waters, watching anxiously as the tide washed it out to sea. The third day. My heart is filled with sorrow and grief, and tears of pain roll down my cheeks as I write these words. I am alone now, as both of my beloved parents have succumbed to the terrible affliction which overcame them. Papa died first, and Mama fell into a steep decline, succumbing soon after. I had to bury their bodies myself, digging shallow graves in the cold, hard ground. With this grim task completed, I've fallen into a dark depression, hiding under my fur blanket and crying in despair. The fourth day. Somehow, I have found the strength to go on, although my hope is quickly fading. My thoughts turn to my pen pal and the deep feelings I've developed for him. I sense that he is close, searching for me in a heroic attempt to rescue me from this evil. But alas, it's all to no avail. We live in different worlds, somehow connected by our bottled messages, but otherwise unable to make physical contact. The storm began shortly after dusk, and it was the worst yet. The winds were so strong that I feared our small stone cottage would be blown off the hillside. I hunkered down, musket in hand, as I awaited the inevitable attack. But the demon's assault was not as I anticipated. The wind and rain were pelting down on our roof when the front door suddenly shot open. I jumped up in shock and confronted the intruder, but found myself paralyzed with fear and unable to open fire. The beast didn't take the shape and form I would have expected. It looked like a man clad in a dark robe and hood, but this creature was not a mortal being. I realized as much when the monster slowly dropped its hood to reveal the horror where its face should be, a dark void that I feared would suck in my very soul. Paralyzed by its dark magic, I could neither flee nor fight the beast, and so I merely stood and waited for its killing blow. But the demon elected to spare my life, no doubt wanting to prolong my torment and misery. I don't know whether to feel grateful or not. I was conflicted over whether I would write a further note to my pen pal. As much as I would want to hear from him, I also fear the consequences of involving him further in my most unfortunate situation. In the end, though, I decided to send the bottled message and tell him everything. The brave young man has been searching for me for such a long time, and so I believe he deserves to know the truth. I am lonely, in need to have some kind of human contact, even if it's only in the form of a letter from another realm. I await his response with bated breath. His written words are all I have left. The fifth day. I am beaten, both in body and spirit. I fought for so long, but this evil is too strong for me to defeat alone. I feel immense guilt because I should have never brought my pen pal into this hell. If I had known the consequences for that poor boy, I would not have sent him the first letter. But this was always their plan. I realize this now, and I remember everything. The faceless demon returned during the night, sweeping into my home and former haven with all the confidence and arrogance one would expect from a victor. Whatever defiance I had left in my heart disappeared as the beast forced me to stare into the dark abyss. And I found myself powerless to resist. Suddenly, telling the demon all my secrets and even betraying my beloved pen pal. I surrendered the last part of myself as the darkness overwhelmed me. I understand it all now. The demons have used me as their siren to capture this poor man's soul, as our bottled messages have somehow opened a gateway between our two worlds. They're coming for him now, crossing dimensions and oceans with an unstoppable fury as they seek him out. I've sent one last letter, apologizing with all my heart and providing an advance warning, although I'm sure it's already too late. The worst thing is this isn't the first time this has occurred. I don't know what dark magic these beasts have used to erase my memory, but it's all coming back to me now. This pen pal wasn't my first. The demons have been using me for so long, exploiting my youthful hope and optimism to make me write these letters, reaching out to vulnerable souls and drawing them in so the vile masters of this isle can claim their new victims. I hate them with all my heart for what they've made me do, and I write this account in the hope I will remember, thus escaping their hellish trap so I can finally end this vicious cycle. These vile beings have stolen everything from me, and now all I have in my heart is hatred. I will fight them to my dying breath. Conclusion, Diabolos. For several years now, accounts have emerged on online forums from young men claiming to have received bottled messages from a young French noblewoman trapped on a legendary island in the North Atlantic. These messages have turned up in every corner of the globe, but somehow are always written in the native language of the reader. My research confirms that such tales date back long before the internet age, or indeed before any modern form of communication, with accounts appearing in newspapers and journals going back to the 16th century. The discovery of Emily's diary has shed some light on the dark secrets behind this tragic tale, although many questions remain unanswered. In these days of full global exploration and satellite imagery, we know that the Isle of Demons doesn't physically exist on our planet, but clearly it is possible for beings or objects to cross over to whatever alternate dimension or plane of existence where the isle exists. Emily seems to have little concept of time, and so one can only assume that the normal rules don't apply in the hellish dimension where she's imprisoned. It appears she receives the letters within a matter of days, whereas decades have passed for her pen pal on the other side of the exchange. If Emily truly is the daughter of Marguerite de la Roque and her lover, then that would make her over 400 years old, which is of course impossible. Therefore, the only feasible conclusion is that poor Emily's soul is trapped in some kind of purgatory, where she is forced by demonic entities to assist them in their foul plot to capture the souls of young men and drag them back to their hellish realm. One can only feel sympathy for this poor young lady and hope that one day she manages to break the chain and escape from her demonic tormentors once and for all. Chapter 2. Fort Enfer. Location: the Sahara Desert, approximately 300 miles southwest of Algiers. Category: Cryptozoology, Legendary Beasts. Primary source: The Journal of Legionnaire Patrick Devlin. Introduction, Diabolos. The story of Fort Enfer and its doomed garrison has largely been erased from the historical record. What few references I could find within French military records describe a standard block fort built deep in the Sahara and garrisoned by a small company of Foreign Legion soldiers. On the surface, Enfer was no different from the dozens of other bases dotted across the French Sahara in an attempt by the colonial power to wrestle control from the native tribesmen and warlords. Fort Enfer was first constructed between 1863 and 1864, but all references to it end after the spring of 1876. A footnote in the official history of the Legion mentions a major assault on the base at that time, with the entire garrison being killed in action. There are no further details on the nature of the battle. Most historians assume that the fortress was overwhelmed by local rebels, but the evidence I have uncovered suggests differently. The journal that I will quote from is reported to be written by first-class Legionnaire Patrick Devlin, an Irish renegade and volunteer in the Legion. I discovered the century-old journal in a flea market in Tangiers during the early 1990s. The Arab trader manning the stall offered me a cheap price and seemed eager to part with it. I remember returning to my hotel and reading the journal's contents with bated breath, not setting the old book down until I'd read it cover to cover. The story by the late Patrick Devlin seemed unbelievable, and naturally I was suspicious. I've come across a lot of hoax documents over the years, and sometimes they're hard to detect, even for an experienced eye such as mine. And still, I did more research in my due diligence. Carbon dating confirmed that the journal dated back to the late 19th century, and local accounts led me to the conclusion that there was more to this story, and Legionnaire Devlin's account is likely to be the truth. And so, here is the unabridged journal for you to judge for yourself. The Journal of Legionnaire Patrick Devlin, April 17, 1876. They say we Irish are all as mad as cut snakes, and given my current predicament, I can't really argue. Here's me, a young lad from the back end of County Cork, used to rain and bogs and green grass. The English trained me in soldiering, but then forced me out of my home country due to my links with the Fenian movement. And so, I ran to the continent and joined the Foreign Legion in Paris. This is how I came to be here. Fort Enfer, aptly named for its hellish setting, a desert land of intense heat. I stand guard on the fortifications as a fiery sun burns my pale Irish skin, and all I can see is an ocean of hot sands in every direction. I still can't believe my life has come to this, but I'm a soldier and must do my duty. Our base is built in the standard block formation, crudely but firmly constructed from rocks dragged out here on the backs of camels years ago. This is the boundary of the French Empire, sitting right on the edge of the civilized world. There are 40 men in our small company, a mixture of nationalites from all over Europe, German, Italian, Spanish. Predictably, I'm the only Irishman. Many languages are spoken inside Enfer's walls, but we all know enough French to communicate and follow orders. Our commander is Captain Durand, a veteran officer from Toulouse. He's a small man with a Napoleon complex who makes our lives even more miserable. But such is the life of a soldier. Our company is completed by half a dozen local scouts, hardened Bedouin trackers who keep to themselves, rarely speaking, but always praying in the direction of Mecca. They view us with suspicion, and there is always tension, but these natives know the desert better than we ever will, and so we depend on them for our mission. Officially, we're here to project French colonial power in this part of the world, and to put rebellious tribesmen in their place. As an Irishman who was run out of his own country by an imperial power, I have mixed feelings about our job here. But I'm a mercenary serving in a force notorious for harsh discipline. I made my choice and must follow orders. We've received reports of a small band of rebel tribesmen on camelback roaming just south of our location. Durand has a patrol to intercept this enemy force, and I was lucky enough to be picked for this operation. I suspect we'll face a long, exhausting day trekking through the desert sands, under the baking sun, and find nothing. But orders are orders, and there's soldiering to be done. April 18th, 1876. I thank the Lord that I made it safely back to the fortress, because now I know there is truth to the local legends, and there's a far greater threat than restless tribesmen out in the desert. We set out shortly after dawn, with Captain Durand commanding the patrol of 8 soldiers and 2 of our native trackers, Abdul and Muhammad. We rode on camelback as we set forth into the desert, the intense sun soon rising and slowly baking us as we rode in circles, searching for any signs of the alleged rebels. The search seemed fruitless, and Durand slowly grew more frustrated and angry as we dealt with the heat and the sand. But then our guides discovered tracks leading deeper into the desert. To our mutual shock, the camel tracks were soon replaced by trails of blood and entrails, and we discovered the scene of a horrific massacre. The sands had been churned up, as if the ground had collapsed from underneath, and the land was covered with mutilated corpses and body parts. Slaughtered man and camels, ripped apart and eviscerated by some unknown attacker. I looked upon the massacre with disgust, shock, and fear. In all my years of soldiering, I'd never seen a bloodbath so gruesome, and I didn't know who or what could have carried out this horrifically violent act. The captain believed the natives were slaughtered by a rival tribe, but even at the time he didn't sound sure. More worrying was the reaction of Abdul and Muhammad. They're hard men of the desert, and I'd never seen them scared before. But when the men saw the massacre, they both became visibly unsettled, whispering to one another in their native tongue, their eyes widening with terror as they spoke. Our guides strongly recommended that we leave the site of the massacre and return to the fort without delay. I was inclined to agree, but Durand wanted to survey the scene to recover weapons and ammunition, so it was some time before we set off for home. I recall the great relief I experienced when we saw Fort Enfer on the far horizon, but this relief soon turned to terror and the desert opened up behind us, the sand collapsing as something huge made its way to the surface. Me and the other troops stood in shocked awe at the scene, but our Bedouin guides broke and ran, riding their camels at great speed as they fled back to the fort. Durand screamed after them, ordering the 2 Arabs to halt and stand, but his authority had broken down. We couldn't see whatever monstrosity had emerged from the depths as the beast remained just below the surface, but clearly it was huge in size and moving quickly in our direction, the sands parting as it tore through the desert as easily as a shark swimming through water. My comrades and I are hardened soldiers and veterans, but we've learned when to fight and when to run. And in that moment, we all fled for our very lives. All except for Captain Durand, that is, our stubborn commander, who stood his ground and screamed back at us, threatening court-martials for abandoning our posts. But even Durand's camel saw the writing on the wall, as it bucked him off his back and galloped back towards the base along with the rest of us. I glanced over my shoulder just long enough to see a screaming Durand disappearing under a wave of sand as the unseen attacker devoured him. We whipped our camels to make them run faster, but they hardly needed the motivation as they recognized the mortal danger. Thankfully, the men on the wall saw our predicament, opening the gate for us to enter the fort. We made it just in the nick of time as our comrades slammed the gate shut behind us. I feared the unseen subterranean beast would simply plow through, as I reckoned the fort's gate and wall couldn't stop it. God must have been looking out for us, though, because the monstrosity abruptly stopped its charge, disappearing back into the ground, whilst leaving a long trench of sand in its wake. We'd survived the first attack, but now our commander is dead, and all the men are terrified, myself included. Discipline is breaking down as angry and frightened mercenaries scream at each other in a multitude of languages, aggressively waving rifles and bayonets as they argue over what to do next. In the end, we have no real choice, though. We must assume that the subterranean monster is still out there in the surrounding desert. The nearest garrison of significant size is close to 100 miles to the north, and there's little chance we would make it there in one piece. It seems our only option is to stay put and defend the fort until the relief column arrives. I hope to get some rest tonight, as tomorrow I'll return to duty on the wall, and I fear there's more bloodshed to come. April 19th, 1876. Our trackers left during the night, abandoning us to our fate. I'm sure they know what's coming and are content to leave us foreign devils to the beast's wrath. Morale plummeted after the men discovered our native guides had deserted. The troops no longer argue and fight, but instead the mood is solemn and depressed, as soldiers mutter silent prayers or write their last wills on rough parchment. We are all renegades and outcasts, foreign mercenaries trapped in this hellish place. And perhaps this monster has been sent to punish us for our collective sins. The beast came again shortly before dusk, circling the desert around our walls as if searching for weakness and a way in. We are yet to see its full form, but the monster must be 40 to 50 feet in length. We fired at it from the walls with our rifles, but our bullets had no impact, and it's clear our weapons are not powerful enough to penetrate its thick hide. The beast has given up for the night, retreating back underneath the sands. But I have no doubt that it will return. We will work through the night, building up our defenses and preparing for our final stand. April 20th, 1876. The beast has launched its final assault, and our defenses are in shatters, with men devoured and slaughtered without mercy. I have seen the monster's true form and can only conclude that the hideous beast has ascended from hell for the sole purpose of preying upon mortal men. The attack came out of nowhere, taking us all off guard. We expected the behemoth to attack the walls, and so underestimated the beast's cunning as it surprised us by burrowing deep, bypassing our walls and emerging on the inside of the base itself. Although taken by surprise, the troops soon rallied, and we turned our rifles around and opened fire. But all hope was lost once we saw the monster's hideous head emerging from the sands. It's difficult for me to describe the beast with my limited vocabulary, as I've never seen anything like it before, nor was I aware that any such creature existed on God's green earth. The beast is in the shape of a worm or a grub, but has grown to an enormous size, its full length being easily 50 feet. Its mouth is similar to a beak, large enough to swallow a man whole and filled with row after row of razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes are jet black like those of a shark, although I wonder whether its eyesight is limited as it presumably lives beneath the ground. When the enormous creature opens its mouth, it stinks of death and rotting flesh, and it roars with the ferocity of a dozen lions before launching its savage attacks. Whatever its origins, what is clear is that the beast has a ravenous appetite for human flesh, as within minutes it set upon my comrades, ripping both men and camels limb from limb, and spilling their blood all over the hot sands. The scene descended into bloody chaos as any semblance of organized resistance broke down. We fired at the beast, but to no avail, and our bullets only seemed to anger it more. The troops up on the wall might have thought they were safe due to their elevated position, but the monster had yet another fiendish trick to play. We watched on in horror as it spat a thick fluid from its beak, the stream extending for many yards and striking the men up on the barricades. They screamed as the foul liquid burned through their uniforms and melted their skin. Men were falling dead all around me, dying horribly as the monster carried out its wanton slaughter. Somehow, I managed to escape the killing field with two other men, a Spaniard named Diego and a German called Hans. We are all that remains of the company. We fought our way back to the barracks where we barricaded ourselves inside. We plan to make a break for it at dawn, but don't expect to get far. I write this final entry in the hope that this somehow makes it back to my family in Ireland. I want them to know that I died fighting, and I'm sorry. The three of us are from different nations, but we share a common faith. We shall pray together before making our break for freedom. But alas, I fear God is absent from this place. We are in the devil's realm here. This land is cursed, and should be avoided by all mortal men. Heed my warning, whoever finds this. Do not come here. Conclusion. Diabolus. The journal ends here. I have found no record of Patrick Devlin mentioned again, so can only assume he perished during his attempted escape. But then there's the question of Fort Enfer and what became of it. The Foreign Legion never reoccupied the space or deployed another garrison to the region. Despite Legionnaire Devlin's warning, I did attempt to visit the site in the 1990s, only to find it fenced off and guarded by units of the Algerian army, with access prohibited and signs displaying warning of arrest or lethal force against all trespassers. I was able to talk to the locals who spoke of an ancient demon which has plagued the region for centuries and is rumored to have developed a taste for human flesh. Devlin's description of the beast isn't the most detailed, but it is largely consistent with the other accounts I've collated from local sources. The evidence points towards a previously unknown and officially undocumented alpha predator living in this far-flung quarter of the Sahara Desert, a species possibly related to the Mongolian death worm found in the Gobi, although much more large in size and more aggressive in nature. That said, one cannot fully discount Devlin's theory that the beast is demonic in nature. What's clear is that the French and Algerian governments have gone to considerable length to ensure that the beast's existence remains a secret, and probably they have good reasons for doing so. But unless the beast or species becomes extinct, it seems likely that the truth will eventually come to light. Chapter 3. Gulag 217. Location: Yukat ASSR, the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Category: Satanic Ritual, Demonic Entity, State Secrets. Primary source: Declassified NKVD Intelligence Report from 1937. Introduction: Diabolus. The collapse of the Soviet Union during the early 1990s offered a unique opportunity for researchers such as myself, as the breakdown of government structures allowed access to thousands of previously restricted and highly confidential documents from the Soviet era. I was determined to take this opportunity to discover the truth behind a rumored paranormal event that occurred in Siberia during the 1930s. I traveled to Moscow in 1991 and made discreet inquiries amongst my local contacts, eventually being put in touch with a disgruntled civil servant with access to the Kremlin archives. Even then, I didn't hold out much hope of obtaining what I was looking for, given the sheer volume of classified documents dating from that period. Therefore, I was elated when my crusty Russian archivist came up with the file I wanted, and I was more than happy to pay the hefty price in rubles that he demanded. The terrible crimes and mass murder of the Stalinist era are well known, and the huge network of gulag prison camps constructed across Soviet territory held hundreds of thousands of alleged political and religious dissidents. As Stalin's paranoia grew, more and more supposed enemies were shipped off to these isolated camps, where conditions were brutal and many thousands died due to the harsh weather and the horrible violence dished out by the sadistic guards. The gulags were run by the NKVD, Stalin's notorious secret police, which grew so powerful that they had their own military force and an economic network based on slave labor in the camps. In addition to political dissidents, the gulags also held various non-political criminals as well as religious groups whose beliefs were opposed by the communist regime. Orthodox Christians, Jews, and Muslims were all targeted by Stalin's henchmen, but so were smaller and less well-known religious factions, including underground groups who engaged in dark rituals and blood sacrifices. One such cult was rounded up and sent to the now-forgotten Gulag 217 in eastern Siberia, south of the Arctic Circle. 217 was typical of many of the camps in this region. The prisoners were forced to work in mines under horrendous conditions, and the guards would dish out violent punishments for the slightest of provocations. But what marks out the unnamed camp from hundreds of others is the bizarre events that occurred during the autumn of 1937, shortly after the arrival of the aforementioned satanic cult from Central Asia. And this horrifying incident is recorded in the NKVD report from the time, which I have translated from the original Russian to transcribe here. NKVD report on the Gulag 217 incident, dated November 5, 1937. Mass casualty event. Estimated death toll, 4,500 to 5,000. Perpetrator of unknown origin. Status, highly classified. For Politburo eyes only. Content not to be shared under any circumstances. The penalty for breaking the party's ruling is a mandatory death sentence. Gulag 217 is, or rather was, a work camp holding approximately 5,000 enemies of the people, the majority of whom were serving their debt to the state by working in the nearby iron mines. The camp was garrisoned by a battalion of 500 NKVD guards and infantrymen equipped with standard small arms but lacking in heavy munitions. The work camp experienced some minor discipline problems in the past, but nothing that caused command serious concern. On the 3rd of September 1937, around 100 religious dissidents arrived at Gulag 217 and were processed by the camp's commander, Major Sergei Ivanov. Footnote: Major Ivanov's whereabouts are unknown following the incident. His current status is missing, presumed dead. The new batch of prisoners all originated from the Central Asian Soviet republics and belonged to a religious sect under the leadership of a Kazakh man calling himself Cain. Command holds little intelligence on this nameless sect, but it appears their philosophy runs contrary to the Abrahamic religions. Local party officials condemned Cain's group as enemies of the people, citing barbaric pagan-like rituals and blood sacrifices. Survivor accounts and reports received by command prior to the incident all point to a deterioration in discipline following the arrival of Cain's group. Comrade Major Ivanov's situation report of September 14th states that the sect continued to practice bizarre rituals after their arrival in camp, despite the blanket ban on all religious ceremonies. Ivanov also reported several unexplained deaths which occurred shortly after the group's arrival, and noted this as a cause for concern. The next report received by command was dated September 21st. The content of this second report from Ivanov took on a darker tone, noting how morale amongst his men had plummeted, while the prisoners were becoming increasingly restless. The religious dissidents were continuing their prohibited activities despite the threat of severe punishment. What's more, the sect was said to be growing, with more prisoners joining them and engaging in their increasingly violent rituals. In an attempt to curtail the faction's activities, Major Ivanov placed Cain in solitary confinement, but he reported that this action had only led to a further escalation, with violent clashes between prisoners and guards occurring daily. After this, Ivanov's report became increasingly bizarre, as he spoke of the ground trembling and disembodied voices heard in the dead of night. There had also been further unexplained deaths and disappearances within both the camp and the mine. The reply from command to Ivanov was direct and unambiguous, stating that the major must restore discipline within the camp immediately, or face being removed from his position and branded an enemy of the people. In any event, this was the last situation report received from Major Ivanov before the incident took place. The next communication received from Gulag 217 was a frantic SOS radio transmission broadcast on September 25th, reporting a full-scale prisoner uprising and requesting immediate reinforcements. A rapid response company of NKVD mechanized troops was dispatched within a matter of hours, but all contact was lost with the relief column soon after. At this point, the situation was escalated to Moscow and brought to the attention of the General Secretary. A full brigade of the Red Army was mobilized and sent north to investigate. What they found was a massacre, with thousands of badly burnt and dismembered corpses strewn all across the site, while the gulag itself was reduced to a ruin, with structures burnt to the ground and a huge borehole in the center of the camp, suggesting that a major seismic event had taken place. A handful of shaken and terrified survivors were discovered hiding amongst the burnt-out ruins. Troops took them and they returned to Moscow for interrogation at NKVD headquarters. Their accounts provide a vivid picture of what happened at Gulag 217. Although their stories are outlandish, superstitious, and counter-revolutionary in nature, our investigators had not been able to determine a feasible alternative explanation for the sheer scale of the massacre that occurred at this location. Whilst survivor accounts differ on some details, guards and prisoners both agree that the trouble began at dusk on September 25th, when Major Ivanov ordered all prisoners to assemble in the main yard, where they were instructed to stand and salute as a collective punishment for the previous incidents. It was a freezing cold morning with snow coming down in a heavy blizzard, and so conditions would have been uncomfortable for the prisoners. After several hours of this treatment, the prisoners became increasingly agitated, Kane's followers and their recent converts apparently taking center stage and drumming up dissent. The tension built until all hell broke loose in the middle of the morning, as suddenly several thousand prisoners broke and charged maniacally at the guards, fighting them off with improvised weapons in their bare hands. At this point, Major Ivanov ordered his men to open fire with rifles and submachine guns, slaughtering the hundreds of rebellious prisoners in a hail of bullets. But the rebels had the advantage of numbers and their ferocious assault was relentless. Soon, the guards were overwhelmed as men were beaten to death in the snow, and the prisoners armed themselves with their discarded weapons. The surviving guards fled to their barracks, as did Major Ivanov, and rioters took control of the camp. Their first action was to free Kane from solitary confinement, and the cultist was said to have received a hero's welcome in the yard, as almost all the prisoners rallied behind him. It was during the afternoon that the SOS call was radioed in, and local headquarters mobilized the Rapid Response Company. Meanwhile, a standoff ensued at Gulag 217, with Ivanov and his remaining men barricaded inside of their barracks, while Kane's rebels controlled the rest of the camp. During the chaos of battle, Kane had taken around 50 NKVD guards as hostages. It was initially assumed that the cult leader planned to use the hostages as bargaining chips, but in actual fact, he had more sinister plans in store for them. The ritual began sometime after dusk on September 26, the snow still falling as Kane's men made bonfires out of the guard towers using siphoned petrol, as they forced the guards down to their knees in a perfect circle in the center of the yard. There is some confusion about the sequence of events that night. One thing all accounts agree on is that a mass chanting began at midnight, as thousands sung in unison in a language unknown in the Soviet Union. The meaning behind the words chanted are also unknown, but all who heard it spoke of a dark and foreboding mood which overcame them, as it seemed clear that something claustrophobic was about to occur. As the chanting reached a crescendo, 50 of Kane's original cult members stepped forward, using knives and bayonets to cut the throats of their hostages, spilling the warm blood of the 50 guards onto the snow-covered ground. The tremors began shortly after, as the earth shook violently and the ground began to crack open. Witnesses say there was a sudden spike in temperature as the snow began to melt, and then the ground collapsed as men fell into a huge borehole close to 100 feet wide. Although the situation was confused to the point of anarchy, all witnesses agree on what happened next. The entity which emerged from the borehole, having apparently ascended from the depths of the earth, was said to have been the height of 10 men with a vast chest adorned with thick steel armor. Witnesses described the entity as having the torso and thick arms of a giant man, but the head and hooves of a beast. Its head was topped with horns, its eyes burnt a bright red, and its mouth was filled with sharpened teeth. The beast roared like an alpha predator and unveiled a weapon close to 20 feet in length, described as a sword of pure fire. Although Kane and his collaborators had orchestrated this event, it seems they were unable to control the beast they had summoned, as within minutes the monstrosity set upon the rebels, slaughtering dozens with a few swipes of its sword. Our witnesses say the scene descended into pandemonium, as terrified prisoners fled in all directions, but the slaughter continued unabated as the monster stomped through the snow, slicing men in two and stomping them underfoot. It seems that the guards and prisoners set aside their previous differences as they joined forces in an attempt to fight their attacker, but by all accounts, the small arm bullets simply bounced off the beast's thick armor without causing it any harm. Much was lost in the chaos of battle, as the camp structures were burnt to the ground and hundreds of men died in the flames or under the beast's sword. It is assumed that both Ivanov and Kane died during the onslaught, although neither of their bodies has ever been identified. The NKVD relief column would have arrived at the camp during the early morning, but without heavy weapons they met the same fate as the others, their trucks being destroyed on the road and the troops slaughtered, their corpses left in the snow. Our witnesses are unclear as to what happened to the beast once this massacre was complete, with some saying it descended back into the borehole, while others are certain it marched northwards into the blizzard. In any event, the entity was no longer present when our mechanized brigade arrived on site, although the beast had left behind huge tracks, a burning camp, and thousands of dead bodies. It is of the utmost importance to state security that all evidence of the Gulag 217 incident is tightly contained. As a result, the work camp has been permanently decommissioned, and all survivors have been detained and shipped to separate gulags across the Soviet Union. The site has been cordoned off by the military and shall remain strictly off-limits for the foreseeable future, while the few surviving members of Kane's counter-revolutionary sect have been tried by closed court and sentenced to death by firing squad. The General Secretary has directed that it is paramount to state security that all evidence of the entity and its assault on 217 is erased, and that no reference whatsoever to the incident reaches our capitalist enemies in the West. Conclusion. Diabolus. The NKVD report speaks for itself. It may seem difficult to comprehend how such a major paranormal incident resulting in huge loss of life could have been covered up so effectively, but one must remember the extreme levels of secrecy within Stalin's Russia and the huge death toll that occurred during his horrendous purges. What's interesting about the secret report is that it makes no reference to Satanism, hell, or a demon, as if even using such words would constitute an existential threat to their Soviet atheist ideology. I was able to visit the former site of the former Gulag 217 during the chaotic period in the early 1990s. The Siberian locals are still very wary of the site, and so I was forced to travel the last number of miles alone. There was little physical evidence left there, although the burnt-out skeletons of the buildings remain, and so does the massive borehole descending deep into the earth. And I felt a cold chill as I looked into the darkness and visualized the monster that had ascended from it decades before. Locals say you can hear the screams and cries of the dead from the depths of hell emanating from the hole, but thankfully I heard no such thing. They also say that the victims were buried in a mass grave nearby, although no one I spoke with knows the exact location. Although the deaths were hidden amongst the mass murders of Stalin's purges, I am glad to finally be able to reveal the truth of what happened to the victims of Gulag 217. Chapter 4. Resurrection Town. Location: Yucca Flat, Nevada testing site, originally. Various locations throughout the state of Nevada since 1961. Category: Ghost Town, Alternate Dimension, Transdimensional Entity. Primary source: unpublished blog of Jason Burnside, student and amateur journalist. Introduction: Diabolus. Most students of history will be familiar with the early atomic age, when nuclear weapons tests by the superpowers were common as the United States and Soviet Union competed to build even more powerful bombs. While the first ever atomic weapon was tested in the deserts of New Mexico in July 1945, the majority of American tests were carried out at the Nevada test site from 1951 onwards. Many of the iconic photographs of mushroom clouds towering above bleak desert landscapes date from that time, and detonations could even be seen from nearby Las Vegas during the 1950s and 60s. This was during the period when above-ground tests were still carried out, and the consequences of deadly fallout were not fully understood. Another interesting aspect of the testing site were the dummy towns constructed by the Department of Defense planners, a little slice of 1950s suburbia built right on the edge of the blast zone. These purposefully constructed fake settlements were incredibly detailed, complete with cars, homes, furniture, household items, and even fully dressed mannequins standing in for citizens. The purpose of these constructs was obviously to give an idea of the effects of a nuclear blast on a civilian area, and the results were both devastating and terrifying in equal measure. Two of the test sites, Doomtown and Survival Town, are fairly well known, but in fact, there was a third site which has been all but erased from the historical record, and its name was Resurrection Town. I spent years chasing the urban legend that is Resurrection Town, traveling through DoD records with no success, as all the files referencing this obscure location were either missing or heavily redacted. I'd almost given up all hope of finding the truth behind this fascinating legend when I received a most unexpected lead. Believe it or not, I actually acquired the source material during a game of poker played in a Las Vegas casino during the summer of 2000. The man I won it from was an eccentric Texan wearing a cowboy hat and calfskin boots, looking like he'd stepped right off the ranch. The Texan was quite a character and took his loss pretty well, although he gave me no information on how the source material had come into his possession, only saying that it contained the key to unlocking the Resurrection Town mystery. The material itself came in the form of a floppy disk containing a single Word document. The text was written by a young man called Jason Burnside, and its contents are incredible. I was able to track down Mr. Burnside and interview him to confirm the details of his account, but sadly, there was a tragic end to his story. I'll come to that in due course, but before I get to the conclusion, here is Mr. Burnside's story in its unedited text. Unpublished blog of Jason Burnside. Andy Simpson was my best friend, and I miss him every day. We met in middle school and bonded, staying together as we progressed into high school, and had to deal with the usual array of bullies and ill-fated crushes on girls who were way out of our league. We were nerds, I suppose, more interested in playing video games and D&D rather than throwing a football outdoors. Andy had a particular interest in the whole world of urban legends, government conspiracies, alien abductions. My friend was a big X-Files fan, so anything out of the ordinary piqued his excitement. We went to separate colleges but kept in touch, and it was spring break 1999 when Andy invited me to go on a trip to Nevada with him. Now, when you think of a vacation in Nevada, the first thing that comes to mind is surely Las Vegas. Casinos, cocktails, strippers. This isn't what my friend Andy had in store for us, though. Instead, we set off into the desert in search of the fabled Resurrection Town. I'd never heard of this legend before, but Andy had become a self-thought expert. In fact, he'd become obsessed with the place. Andy told me how Resurrection Town had been built by the government sometime in the late 50s and was originally located on the Yucca Flat in the Nevada testing site. The official story is that the town was destroyed by a nuclear detonation, but the legend said different. For 4 decades, there were reported sightings of Resurrection Town fully intact, the buildings, the cars, and fittings having not aged in all those years. But that wasn't the strangest part. You see, Resurrection Town was originally located in the testing site, which is of course a restricted zone. But in keeping with its name, the dummy town would pop up in locations all across the state of Nevada, materializing as if out of thin air along some lonely desert road where a random traveler would unwittingly stumble across it. The town would never stay in one place, though, disappearing within a matter of hours. It could be months or even years before it appeared again, but never in the same location. The sites of this legendary ghost town varied in detail, but there were various accounts of bizarre and unnerving occurrences, including those of a strange man dressed in black who wasn't what he appeared to be. Now, the problem with searching for this legendary town was obvious. No one knew when or where it would appear, so finding it was surely impossible. Andy, though, thought differently. He'd spent countless hours tracking down all accounts of the town over the decades, noting the reported times and locations. He claimed he'd found a pattern, developing an algorithm to predict the exact date, time, and GPS coordinates of when it would next appear. I'll be honest, I thought it was all BS. But Andy had some crazy scheme in his head, and he wanted to chase it. I planned to humor him by driving around the desert for a few hours, and when we found nothing, we'd head to Vegas and play the slots. If I'd have known what would actually happen, I would have never gone along with it. We set off from our cheap motel shortly after daybreak, driving out into the desert in Andy's old Chevy. I was navigating, following the X Andy had carefully marked on the map, which was, of course, in the middle of nowhere, forcing us onto back roads and then dirt tracks as we drove further and further out from civilization. Andy was tense, keeping a close eye on the clock and constantly badgering me for directions. It was a boiling hot day and the car's AC was barely working, and so naturally, I was getting increasingly pissed off with what I considered a wild goose chase. I was about to lose my temper and call my friend out. But then, to my utter astonishment, we saw buildings on the horizon. At first I thought it was a mirage, but then Andy cried out in excited triumph as he put his foot down on the accelerator. And I was in a state of stunned shock, because my friend had been right all along. Resurrection Town did exist, and we had found it. I was in a daze as we drove up to the small settlement, trying to tune out my friend's excited ramblings as he parked up in sand and we observed the scene. The town was small, consisting of 5 bungalows, 2 double-story buildings, and even an old-fashioned gas station. There were no signs of decay or decomposition, and one might have believed the structure had been built yesterday. Andy jumped out in excitement, tossing his keys on the dashboard as he grabbed a heavy bag from the back seat and ran towards the inexplicable town. I cautiously followed, still in a state of disbelief, as I cast my eyes upon the scene. I noted the vintage 50s cars parked along the asphalt street, Cadillacs, Chevrolets, and Lincolns, all in pristine condition, shining like new under the hot Nevada sun. I recall having an eerie and unsettling feeling deep in the pit of my stomach, thinking I shouldn't go any further. I watched as Andy removed equipment from his bag, a camera, camcorder, and some sort of sensor I didn't recognize. He switched it on, and it started making a foreboding clicking sound as Andy studied the dial display. He frowned when he saw the results, prompting me to ask questions. "What is that thing?" I inquired nervously. A Geiger counter," Andy replied without hesitation. "Ex-Soviet military. Radiation levels are higher than they should be in this area." I was understandably concerned by his statement, exclaiming, "Radiation? Holy shit, man, are we gonna get sick?" "No, man, don't worry. These readings are within safe levels. I expected this. That's why I came prepared." My friend sounded confident, but I was still scared. Andy's unhealthy obsession had brought us to this place, but I feared he wasn't in control of the situation. "Come on, let's explore," Andy exclaimed, as he ran off the sand and onto the hot tarmac. I wanted to run back to the car and lock myself in, but I had the feeling my friend would need backup, so I reluctantly followed. I experienced a strange energy as we marched along the road, cautiously looking through the transparent windows of the cars whilst feeling like we were intruding in a foreign land. Even Andy seemed to become apprehensive, his previous confidence slowly ebbing away. Nevertheless, he was determined to proceed, pointing towards the open door of the first bungalow. "Come on, man, let's look inside." Despite my fear, I'll confess to feeling curious, and so I cautiously followed my friend in. What we saw was unnerving, to say the least. The living room was immaculately furnished and decorated with no signs of decay or damage despite it being decades old. On the couch sat a family of fully clothed mannequins, a suited father, a mother in a summer dress, and 2 young children, a boy and a girl. All the mannequins were wide-eyed and had fake smiles painted onto their faces. The dummies looked sinister as they all faced towards a black and white television set. Inexplicably, the TV was switched on, displaying a constant static even though it had no visible power source. Occasionally, there was a break in the static transmission, and I swore I could see an image of a black-suited man for a brief second, hearing words spoken in a language I couldn't recognize. I felt a cold chill run through me as I shot my friend a look and said, "What the hell was that?" Andy shrugged his shoulders before replying, "I don't know, man, probably just interference." He removed the camcorder from his bag and started to film, taking a long shot of the mannequins on the couch before moving on. "Let's have a look in here," he said, continuing to film as he walked towards the kitchen. There we found tidy worktops and 50s appliances, but we didn't have long to explore before suddenly being distracted. There was a heavy bang from behind, making both of us jump. Looking back, my heart almost jumped out of my chest when I saw it. The mannequins had all previously faced the TV set, but now, their heads had turned and all 4 were facing Andy and I, looking up upon us with dead eyes and twisted smiles. "Jesus!" I screamed, backing up against the wall in a panic. "What is it?" Andy asked. The mannequins! They were looking the other way a second ago." "No way, man," said Andy, shaking his head in denial. "Are you serious, man? Take a look at the recording." Andy frowned, although he did look at the camcorder display screen and attempted to rewind. "Shit, the camera's dead. It must be the battery." I knew he was lying, and I'd reached the end of my tether. "Come on, Andy, let's get the hell out of here." He seemed reluctant, but nodded his head nevertheless. I walked out cautiously, half expecting the eerie mannequins to come to life and chase after us, but thankfully they didn't. We were soon back out on the street, and I was eager to return to our car, but Andy hesitated. "Come on, man, let's get out of here." Andy looked over at me and shook his head vigorously. "I can't, man, not yet. I might never get this opportunity again." I couldn't believe my friend's attitude, as his dark obsession had overcome his common sense. "You can't be serious, Andy. This town isn't safe." "Just one more house, man, and then we'll go home. I promise." I sighed in exasperation, but didn't argue. God knows I should have fought him. I should have dragged him back to the car, kicking and screaming. I'll regret not doing so for the rest of my days. We cautiously walked along the pavement to the next bungalow as Andy slowly pushed open the door. I expected to see more of those freaky mannequins sitting in the front room, but instead, we came face to face with something far more terrifying. The figure who sat on the leather couch was apparently waiting for us to arrive, because he stood up to greet Andy and I with what I assumed was meant to be a smile. It's difficult to describe the figure we encountered. He took the form of a middle-aged man, standing at roughly 6 feet and wearing an ill-fitting black suit, black shoes, white shirt, and dark tie. But what I really found unsettling was his face. It just didn't look right. His skin seemed like it was stretched too tightly against his skull, and his bloodshot eyes bulged with a fiery intensity. His cheeks and lips were lacking in color, and his head was totally bald. The figure didn't look human. Instead, he seemed like an otherworldly entity impersonating a human being. I knew from first glance that he was dangerous, but found myself frozen to the spot, unable to escape his predatory gaze. He opened what I assumed was his mouth and spoke in a low, unnatural voice, saying, "Greetings, visitors. Welcome to my home." I was still pondering the meaning behind his words when Andy spoke. "My God, it's really you! The man in black!" "Yes. This is one of the names I'm known by. I understand you have come far to visit me." "Yes, I've been searching for so long." "I commend your persistence, and you are both welcome, as long as you follow the rules. There must be no photographic or recorded evidence of your visit to Resurrection Town." My mind was racing as I tried to make sense of this craziness. I don't understand. Who are you, and what is this place?" The man in black emitted what might have been a laugh before he answered my question. "You seem less well informed than your companion. But never mind. I am content to explain. As you may have guessed, I am not from your world, and this settlement technically does not exist in your dimension. I fear the science is beyond your understanding, as is often the case for your species. You humans are keen to bend the rules of the universe in your relentless quest for power. But splitting the atom and other such actions do have consequences. This anomaly in the fabric of space and time is one of them." My jaw dropped at this point. What I'd just been told was truly astonishing and beyond my wildest imagination. I wondered how much of this Andy already knew, but I never got the chance to ask him. I glanced over at my friend and saw the camera in his hand, but didn't have time to shout out a warning before he pointed and clicked, the bright flash filling the room. The man in black's reaction was swift, furious, and brutal. He shot forward at rapid speed, his eyes filled with a murderous rage as he grabbed a hold of my friend's throat and snapped his neck like a twig. I watched on in shocked horror as Andy's lifeless body fell to the floor, and then the attacker turned on me, grabbing my body and pinning me against the wall, his hideous face only millimeters from my own as he spoke with anger and hatred. "Damn you wretched humans! I gave your friend a clear instruction, and he paid the price for disobeying me. Was I not clear?" My legs felt weak and I stood stunned, unable to speak and feeling certain my neck would be the next to snap. But to my relief, some of the anger faded from my assailant's eyes. "I should not blame you for your companion's indiscretions. He has paid the ultimate price, but you were not to know. I will allow you to leave unharmed, but heed my warning, human. Your species has broken barriers before, and no doubt will again. A new era awaits for your civilization, and your scientists will make new discoveries in the years to come. I will let you live, so you can communicate this message to your people." He paused briefly, not releasing me from his tight grip, and continuing to glare through me with his intense inhuman eyes. "If your species continues to play fast and loose with the rules of the universe, you will face consequences far more serious than this small anomaly. You have been warned." With that, he finally released me and motioned for me to leave. I cast one last look at my dead friend, feeling a twinge of guilt before I fled. I ran down the street, glancing back over my shoulder to see the man in black glaring at me and watching me retreat. And then I looked to the window of the first bungalow and saw the 4 mannequins, now standing and watching me with their terrible dead eyes. I totally lost it at that point, sprinting down the tarmac until I was back on the sand. Then, I leapt into Andy's car and started the engine, speeding away into the desert and back towards civilization. I only briefly glanced into the rearview mirror in time to see Resurrection Town fading and then disappearing completely, returning to whatever alternate dimension it had come from, taking the dead body of my best friend with it. So, this is my story, and whether you believe it or not, it is the truth. I have seen the puppet behind the curtain, and can never go back to the life I knew before. Conclusion, Diabolus. This is the end of Mr. Burnside's account, but not quite the end of the story. I was actually able to meet the unfortunate Mr. Burnside after reading his diary. I tracked him down and visited him in his new residence, which, I'm sorry to say, was the Nevada Secure Psychiatric Hospital, where the poor man had been detained following a mental breakdown. Sadly, I was unable to get much additional information from the troubled man, other than his constant rambling and references to the man in black, who he now claimed was haunting his dreams. The tragic saga of Mr. Burnside ended a few short weeks after our meeting, when he hung himself in his room, seemingly unable to live with what he'd seen. Meanwhile, tales of Resurrection Town's sudden appearances and disappearances continue. Most have been undetailed and confused, although the late Mr. Burnside's account does shed some light to the mystery. It's interesting to note how some scientists involved in the Manhattan Project believed the first nuclear test could result in catastrophic consequences for all life on our planet. Clearly, this didn't happen. But perhaps the tests during these early decades of the atomic era led to other events which we don't understand or even notice. The accounts of Resurrection Town suggest this is the case. And perhaps the most chilling aspect of the ill-fated Mr. Burnside's account is the terrifying warning from the man in black, and what it might mean for the future of human civilization. Alas, only time will tell. Epilogue. The Librarian. Well, readers, it is I, here to sum up and offer my final thoughts on Diabolus's masterpiece of hidden history. I have shared just 4 short chapters from the Secret Atlas, and perhaps I shall transcribe more in due course. And this is only one book from my collection, a literal library from hell, which it has been my destiny and misfortune to inherit and preserve. And so, good listeners, perhaps you will choose to join me again if you wish to learn more of the world that exists beyond the edges of our civilized society. But be warned, one can never tell where these dark tales will lead you. Until next time. Hey everybody, Kevin from Nightmares Nightly here. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for listening. I love bringing these stories to life, and I've recently been writing a lot of my own. If you'd like to support the channel and what I do, and hear more of my own stories, please consider becoming a member, where I try to upload exclusive, ad-free stories every week. And as always, thanks for listening, everybody. I pulled into the bar parking lot and stopped the car. I sat there for a moment, letting the engine idle as I thought about what I was doing. I knew my wife and kids were at home waiting for me, but I just couldn't bear to face them right now. The thought of spending another evening with them while avoiding the elephant in the room made me physically sick. I closed my eyes and cursed myself. Everything was going to shit. My wife was pregnant with our 4th child, and I simply wasn't making enough money to support us. Over the past 6 months, our quality of life had slowly declined, and it was becoming harder and harder to explain to the kids what was happening. My wife and I loved each other, but the financial difficulties sprouted endless arguments that could last late into the night. In truth, I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen to us. I didn't know how to pull my family out of this terrifying nosedive. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop thinking about that day when we'd be kicked out of our house. I started having trouble sleeping and my mood worsened. I would find myself snapping at the kids over little things. So instead of taking out my fear and frustrations on my family, I started to drink after work. At first, it was just a beer or two, something to take the edge off. But after a month, I began to stay later and later, drinking more and more. It was time I needed to think. It was a few moments of peace. My wife hated my habits, and I didn't blame her. She never argued with me about it. But when I came home reeking of beer and whiskey, she'd get a look in her eye. That look said everything. I never really was a drinking man before I fell on hard times. Even in college, I never drank much. Certainly never to the point of being seriously drunk. I just didn't see the point. But now that my life was crumbling before my eyes, I found comfort in it. It was a space I could enter and push my thoughts to the edge of my tired mind. And tonight I needed a drink. Before leaving work, my boss told me they were conducting layoffs in the coming weeks. He didn't go into detail, but as I sat in my car, I realized he was unofficially informing me that I would soon be jobless. I felt sick. What the hell was I gonna do? How was I gonna provide for my family? Growing up, I never expected this. Why would I? And the thought of my kids made me terribly depressed. They depended on me. They looked up to me. How was I supposed to tell them that their father was a failure? How was I supposed to tell them that Daddy couldn't pay the bills? I pulled my car door open and forced my mind to settle. I licked my lips. I almost ran into the bar. Music droned somewhere above me as my eyes roamed around the room. Neon beer signs lined the walls and their colors trailed in the air as I sipped my 6th rum and coke. My head was floating above my shoulders and the conversation around me slurred and streaked like wet paint. I licked my lips again and they felt bloated on my face. I blinked lazily and realized I was breathing heavily. I shifted on my bar stool and almost fell off. My mind exploded with dizziness and my stomach churned uncomfortably. How many beers had I had before starting the endless rum and cokes? I couldn't remember. The bar was surprisingly full, but I couldn't focus on individual faces. They piled around me, trying to get in drink orders. and I felt like a rock sticking out in the middle of a moving stream. I raised my glass to my lips and drained the last of its contents. "Hey, Jack, you should go home, buddy," the bartender said, leaning in towards me at the pool of mixing colors. "Maybe one more, and then I'll head out," I mumbled, raising my head to meet his gaze. His face swam before me, and I closed one eye to stop it from moving. "I think you're done, buddy. Come on, go home to your family." I could feel darkness swirling around the edge of my vision. I snorted, and the bartender shook his head. "Want me to call you a cab, Jack?" For some reason, I took this incredibly offensive, and I shook my head violently. Piss off, I'll be fine." My head felt like a bloated boulder. I dug into my pocket and pulled out a wad of crumbled cash. I threw it on the bar and stumbled towards the door. I felt like I was walking through a movie scene I wasn't supposed to be in. People turned to stare at me, and I heard mutterings and snickers directed at my intoxicated state. I was too drunk to register shame, and I shoved some punk kid aside and pushed myself out the front door. The world rocked beneath my feet, and I felt a sudden urge to vomit. I exhaled slowly and dragged my feet towards my car. I was in no state to drive. I grit my teeth and checked my watch. It was after 10. Shit. I banged into my car, still looking at my watch, and let out an angry grunt. I ran my hands over the door until I found the handle and pulled it open. I didn't dare look at my phone and see how many missed calls I had. I sighed as I climbed into the driver's seat. I needed to rest for a moment to settle my head. Then I'd drive home and apologize to my wife. I'd wait to tell her about the inevitable layoffs. But first, I needed to sleep. I closed my eyes, and darkness rushed me. "Hey there, Slick." I pulled my eyes open. Blinding sunlight immediately forced them shut again, and I rubbed my face, trying to clear my mind. To my surprise, I felt all right. In fact, I felt fantastic. I opened my eyes again, and cheery sunbeams warmed my face. I blinked. I was sitting in a sprawling green meadow. Birds chirped overhead, and green grass rustled beneath me. A pleasant breeze chuckling through the air. I was sitting against a tree in a circular clearing with a swaying forest that wrapped around a sparkling pond. Lily pads spotted the crystal surface like green paint on an artist's palette. It was breathtaking. For the first time in months, I felt peace settle in around me. The blue sky overhead was cloudless, and I closed my eyes as I raised my face to absorb the gentle sunlight. Beautiful, ain't it? I snapped out of my trance and shot a look over to my left where the sudden voice had come from. There was a man sitting against a tree, not 5 feet from where I sat. He was in his mid-40s and wearing a tan suit. A silver watch that glittered on his wrist, and his sports jacket wrinkled against the bark. His green eyes sparkled underneath the brim of a blue baseball cap that was pulled low. "Where am I?" I finally asked. The last thing I remembered was passing out of my car, drunk off of my ass. The man smiled to reveal perfect teeth. Don't worry about that. Ain't no use in it. Just relax and enjoy all this." His slight southern accent added to the pleasing atmosphere, and I unexplainably found myself comfortable around this stranger. "My wife. I need to get back to her and my kids," I said without much conviction. It was so impossibly gorgeous here. I knew I needed to get home, but the overwhelming calm I felt made it hard to put action behind my words. "Oh, they ain't going nowhere, Slick," the man said, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath through his nose. Just take a load off. Enjoy yourself. Bewildered, I leaned back against my tree and ran my hands through the blades of grass. The woods filled my head with earthy scent, a combination of dirt and fresh rain on wood. The pond before me glittered like a mirror filled with diamonds, and I found myself smiling. Whatever this place was, I never wanted to leave. All my worries seemed so trivial here. The overbearing stress I had felt earlier was gone, leaving in its place a warm, comforting feeling, almost like happy nostalgia. "I'm Russ, by the way," the man suddenly said from his spot. I turned and saw his eyes were still closed, but a small smile lined his lips. "I'm Jack," I answered, watching a silver fish jump from the surface of the pond to snatch a bug. The man, Russ, chuckled. "Oh, I know who you are, Slick." I cocked my head at him. "Who are you? What is this place?" Russ adjusted the ball cap on his head before answering. "I just told you. I'm Russ. And this," he spread his hands, "this is just a little slice of peace, buddy. Ain't nothing more." "Can I stay here?" I asked after some time. Russ snorted, but there was no malice in it. "'Fraid not, partner. That wouldn't be good. This place ain't meant for that. Not anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "Not anymore?" Before he could answer, a noise echoed in the forest around us. It was distant and low, a single deep note that crawled up the sky and fell upon us. It sounded like the beat of a great drum. Russ pulled his cap up and sat a little straighter. "What was that?" I asked as the sound faded. Russ looked at me, his eyes uneasy. "That's why you can't stay here for very long." And suddenly the drum sounded again, and again and again, a constant beat that filled the woods with a single ominous note. And for some reason, it filled me with creeping dread. "Not good," Russ mumbled under his breath. "What is it?" I stressed, feeling uneasy. Russ stood up, brushing himself off. "Oh, it's the whistling man. Oh, he's bad news, Slick. You don't want to be around if he shows up." I wasn't following anything he said, and it must have shown on my face because he raised his hands. "Listen, you need to leave," he said, as the drums slowly began to grow louder. "Why? What'll happen?" Russ waved me off. "Nothing good, Slick, I'll tell you that much. You can come back, but not when he's around." But where is he?" I sputtered as Russ advanced on me. Before he could answer, the forest filled with a piercing cry, a sharp whistle that cut through the sky and echoed all around us. I slammed my hands over my ears as a deafening note danced across the sun rays and exploded across the meadow. As the wavering echo faded, another whistle followed, this time lower, a kind of haunting melody that chilled me instantly. The drum was growing louder, and I thought I felt the earth shiver slightly beneath my feet. Russ turned to me, his eyes wide. "Get out of here! Go!" He shoved me backwards, and I stumbled, tripping over my feet, and woke up gasping in my car. I immediately opened the door and vomited into the parking lot, a great gush of hot stomach bile and gurgling rum. Tears leaked from my bloodshot eyes as I sat up and wiped my mouth. My head was splitting and I was desperately thirsty. I looked at my watch and groaned. It was a little after midnight. I took a few seconds to collect myself, thinking back on what had just happened, what I just experienced. I could still hear the echoing shrill note of that chilling whistle. Or did I? I ran my hands over my face, the consequences of my nighttime drinking churning my stomach again. How was I going to explain this to my family? What would I tell my wife? She was going to be furious. I suddenly wished I was back in the meadow. The serene peace it had offered upon arrival was intoxicating. No worries, no stress, no responsibilities. Just warm sun and beautiful accepting nature. As I started my car, I made a mental decision. I would do anything to go back. And now, I thought I knew how to get there. The next 2 days were waking hell. As expected, and rightly so. My wife was pissed. She wasn't a woman who yelled or threw things. I almost wish she was. Instead, she turned to ice, barely acknowledging my existence until my due sentence was up, whenever that was. I tried to be extra active with the kids, even taking them out for ice cream, but that wasn't enough to get my dear wife to warm to me. It was the weekend and every minute seemed like a chore. On the outside, I was super dad, making sure to always wear a smile and engage my kids in conversation and playful fun. None of this thawed my wife out, and I felt the thirst return to me with a vengeance. I still hadn't told her about the inevitable layoffs, and judging by her mood, I wouldn't until her fury had passed. When Sunday night rolled around and she was still not talking to me, I decided that after work the following day, I would return to the bar and get shit-faced again. I needed to see if I could go back to that meadow. Oh, I needed it in the worst kind of way. My sanctuary of peace. I knew it was the worst thing I could do, but the frustrations of the weekend pushed logic out of my frazzled mind. She didn't fully understand the stress and worry I was going through. She didn't know the weight I carried every day. It wasn't her fault, but I expected her to cut me some slack. As I slid into bed that night, my wife silently turning her back to me, I licked my lips and focused on tomorrow. The need was so great I almost got up and left right there and then. What little reason I still possessed forced my eyes closed instead, and I tried to summon the vision of the meadow. Oh, I could almost feel it, waiting for me right behind my eyes. If I focused hard enough, I thought I could smell the greenery swirling through the swaying forest. If I shut everything out, I thought I could hear the frogs croaking at the edge of the water. Was that Russ? I was sure I had just heard him speaking to me, his southern accent melting the air like warm butter over steamed corn. But it was all just out of reach. For whatever reason, I couldn't quite access that special place. I needed a catalyst. I needed a damn drink. And that's how I found myself slumped over the bar the following night. The day had seemed like an eternity, the clock indifferent to my desperation. On the way to work that morning, I almost stopped at the liquor store, but had managed to hold off. My boss didn't say anything to me, which I took as a good sign, and I diligently plowed through my day's duties. My wife still wasn't talking to me, barely looking my way as she prepared the kids for school. I tried to give her a hug goodbye, but she brushed me off, muttering that she had to finish packing lunches. This sparked an anger in me, and I wordlessly left the house, clamping my teeth shut so I wouldn't say anything stupid. I knew getting wasted tonight wasn't going to repair our teetering marriage, but I had been pushed to my limit. If she wasn't going to forgive me, then what was the point? Her morning coldness had cemented my resolve to go out tonight, and I barely felt any guilt. I justified it in my mind with little effort, and as I pulled into the bar parking lot, I felt a cool blanket of relief sweep over me. This was where I could let go a little. This is where I didn't have to think about my problems. I tipped the glass to my lips and sucked the rum off the ice cubes. I hadn't bothered mixing my drinks tonight. I had a destination in mind, and I wanted to get back there as soon as possible. And judging by the way the room swam, I was doing a pretty good job of it too. The bar was relatively empty, and I was relieved for it. A quiet tune played from the retro jukebox in the corner, and I hummed along as I tapped the bar for another refill. The usual bartender was off tonight, Kenny, and I was grateful for it. He had a tendency to cut me off, and I didn't want that tonight. I smiled at the young lady, my drink server for the evening, and muttered my thanks as she placed a fresh rum in front of me. I was trying my best to maintain my composure, and a lack of people helped my cause. I didn't want to stop drinking until I couldn't see. I downed half the rum in one swig, and felt it slam into my stomach like a derailed train. I burped behind my hand and felt my eyelids flutter as if they were practically swollen. I smacked the taste from my lips and my tongue burned with alcohol. My thoughts had become hard to control, the booze filling my mind like a sinking ship. I had been here for 3 hours and felt like if I tried to stand, there was no guarantee my legs would obey. I tipped the glass to my lips one last time, and that was enough to cloud my vision with a heavy fog. Blackness pressed in on my slosh brain as I ran a hand over my face, and it felt like there was a face over my face. I giggled at the thought, but was suddenly overcome with sadness. I blinked a few times and decided it was time. I cashed out with a mumbled thanks to the bartender and very carefully walked over to my car. The world rocked beneath my feet, and the full moon was so bright I had to shut one eye against it. My head felt thick, and every breath tasted like ice and spiced rum. I stumbled to my car and managed to get the door open before collapsing into the driver's seat. I rolled my head back and shut my eyes, a small smile on my lips. I waited for it to happen. It didn't take long. "Well, howdy there, Slick." I opened my eyes and gentle sunlight lit my vision. Stunning greens and blues melted together to form breathtaking beauty, and my senses filled with the peaceful, now familiar meadow before me. I was back. The dense forest encircling this pocket of paradise swayed gently in the breeze, the leaves rustling together to form a serene soundtrack to the majesty of this hidden nature. The grass was soft beneath me, like cool blades of emerald silk. I ran my hands through it and leaned comfortably against the tree I sat under. The pond before me was captivating in its stillness, a plate of shining silver. I turned and saw Russ sitting a few trees over, his blue baseball cap resting high on his head. His tan suit jacket was balled behind his head, and he leaned comfortably against it. I had to come back. This place. I trailed off, trying to find the words. "It is something special, ain't it?" Russ grinned, crossing his feet in front of him. "You got that right." Silence passed between us, and I sighed heavily, a smile filling my lips. My head emptied of worries and was filled with complete tranquility. The secluded isolation added to calming magic of the meadow, and pleasant birdsong danced between the trees. Again, I was filled with the desire to never leave this place. Everything was just so perfect. It made life seem unfair in comparison. Why were things so hard? Why did misfortune and approaching despair plague my every day? Why couldn't I just stay here, away from all of that, and close my eyes in peace? this was all I needed. You know, Russ said from his spot, as much as I enjoy your company, I worry about you. I snorted and looked over at him. Oh yeah? Why's that? Russ adjusted his baseball cap. You know why? Don't make me say it, Slick. Can you just let me enjoy the quiet? I asked, shutting my eyes. Of course, pal, of course. But I need you to know something. Before he could continue, a distant drum began to beat. I opened my eyes. Russ pointed out into the woods, towards the noise. That. I shifted, trying to block out the sound. It twisted my stomach with unease. What about it? I asked softly. Russ stared at me under the brim of his cap. That didn't used to be here. I nodded towards the distant drum. That? The drum? His green eyes bored into my skull. Not just the drum. Him. Who? Russ's voice dropped to a whisper. The Whistling Man. You can tell when he's around when the drum starts. He's looking for you, Slick. And he ain't ever gonna stop. I shifted uncomfortably. Who is he? What does he want? Russ stared out into the forest. Do you really have to ask? I suddenly threw my hands up in frustration. What are you talking about? Before he could respond, the air filled with a shrieking note. A long, high whistle that bore into my head like a screaming drill. Swarms of birds erupted from the trees and took flight, escaping the sound. Russ jumped to his feet, fear written across his face. You better scram, Slick. It sounds like he's close. I don't want to. I don't care who he is. I don't care what he wants. Anything is better than going back out out there, I finished, jabbing my finger towards the sky. Russ approached me as the drumbeat grew louder, another whistle slicing through the metal like a razor blade. It was the same low note as before, that strange melody chilling me to my bone. But despite that, the thought of leaving made me want to weep. I had only just arrived. I couldn't leave yet. I couldn't face what awaited me on the other side. He doesn't have to be here, Russ said urgently, shooting a look over his shoulder. You have to get rid of him. It wasn't always like this. What the hell are you talking about? I screamed. The drum was deafening at this point, and I could feel the soil beneath my feet begin to tremble. Russ opened his mouth to speak, but a new voice erupted from inside the forest, a horrible deep bellow of rage.
Jackie! Where are you, Jackie?
Another series of long whistles followed, cracking the air like a bullwhip. Russ's eyes went wide and the blood drained from his face. He took a step forward and raised his hands to me. Go on now, go! He shoved me hard and I went sprawling backwards and woke with a jolt inside my car. Nausea tossed my stomach like a rotten salad and I slammed the door open and emptied my gut onto the asphalt. No! I screamed, wiping my face and pounding on the steering wheel. No, I can't be here. Let me go back. The horror of being back in the waking world, faced once again with my looming, life-ruining problems, filled me with absolute panic. The night air filled with indifferent moonlight and I raised my eyes to the sky. I can't do this anymore. Russ, let me come back. I thought I could feel his presence, a tickle in the back of my head. I focused on it, begging to be swept away to the calming meadow. I didn't care about this whistling man. I didn't care about what he wanted. I couldn't face my family right now. I didn't want to think about work or money. I just wanted to go back. Help! I cried, slamming my fist into the dashboard. Take me back! I sat there for a moment, trembling, bloodshot eyes catching focus on everything, then nothing. I wiped my face. You can't do this to me. You can't make me stay here. I checked my watch and saw that it was midnight. Last call wasn't for another hour and a half. I licked my lips and ran a hand through my hair. I felt like shit. I knew I probably looked like shit too, but that wasn't going to stop me. I'm coming back, I growled, stepping out of my car, avoiding the puddle of vomit. And I'm not gonna let you send me away this time. My legs wobbled as I carefully made my way back inside the bar. I steadied my breathing and summoned as much willpower as I could. It wasn't easy. My throat burned and my eyes were watering. The world rocked and swayed beneath me, and I grit my teeth against it. I pushed the bar doors open and slowly made my way back to my stool. I motioned for the bartender, and she returned to me, an eyebrow cocked. She told me she was surprised to see me back, and I told her my car wasn't working. I told her a friend was coming to give me a lift, and I was just coming back to kill some time. I spaced out my words and tried my best not to slur. I asked her if she could load me up with a beer and a shot. She chewed her lip for a moment, and I could see her thinking, my intoxicated state apparent no matter how good an actor I thought I was. I reached into my pocket and slid her 220s, tipping her a wink. For taking such good care of me tonight, I said. The money shattered any moral dispute she had been fighting against and immediately cracked the top off a beer. She filled a shot glass and placed it in front of me, telling me to behave myself. I thanked her and assured her I would. When she turned away, I slammed the shot, gasping at the sudden charge of heat. Whatever edge I had lost from vomiting returned as the rum hit my system. I snatched the beer up and sucked it down, exhaling heavily as the last drop slid onto my tongue. I felt sick, like a soaked sponge left on the counter. I stank, and already my upset stomach fought against the booze. I looked around, the room tilting and swaying. I saw there were only 2 other patrons. They were over in the corner, not paying attention, and to my delight, I saw them wave over the bartender. It looked like they knew her. She shot a quick look at me and then went over to them. Heart racing, consciousness blinking, I quickly leaned forward and snatched the half-full bottle of rum from the counter. I chanced to look over my shoulder and saw that my act had gone unnoticed. "You can't get rid of me," I mumbled, tipping the bottle to my lips. "You can't make me stay here." I closed my eyes and drank. I didn't stop until everything went dark. I gasped and opened my eyes. I was on my stomach, soft clovers tickling my face. I breathed them in and sighed, relief running through me. I got to my knees, pulling myself up, and surveyed the meadow. Something was wrong. The sun was hidden behind thick gray clouds, a blanket of dark cotton. I craned my neck and was met with nothing but silent gloom. The woods were quiet, the usual chorus of birds and bugs eerily absent. I could hear my heart hammering in my chest, a rush of beating blood in my ears. I looked to my left, scanning the tree line, and suddenly felt sick as my eyes focused on the scene before me, a deep fear sparking in my chest. The forest was ripped in half, leaving a dark corridor of splintered ruin. It looked like an immense train had exploded through the woods, obliterating everything in its path. Fractured trees and uprooted underbrush spilled out into the clearing, the remains of nature's vicious goring. "What's going on?" I whispered, voice tainted with fear. I suddenly spotted something in the pond, floating on the surface. It bobbed slightly, and as I squinted to try to make out what it was, my eyes went wide and panic formed in my throat. "Oh no, 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 no!" I cried, charging towards the water's edge. I splashed into the shallows at full speed, tripping and then pulling myself up. I shoved the lily pads aside and sloshed deeper, the horror before me gaining clarity. "Russ!" I screamed, reaching out for his motionless body. The water was up to my waist as I grabbed him, pulling him up from under. He was dead weight in my arms, his head rolling against my chest as I dragged him toward shore. Come on, I begged, gritting my teeth, my heart racing, muscles groaning. His eyes were closed and he didn't move. Gasping, I finally got us onto the grass where we collapsed in a rush of weight and water. I struggled to regain my breath as I got to my knees and flipped Russ over on his back. My heart sank. His face was a mess of cuts and dark bruises. His clothes were a tangled jumble of torn fabric and tattered cloth. "What happened to you? Who did this to you?" I cried, brushing strands of wet hair from his face. I felt like I already knew the answer. I shifted myself over him, fighting panic. I placed my hands over his chest and began administering CPR. "Please wake up," I begged, pumping his chest. "Please, you have to wake up. Don't do this, please." I leaned down and blew into his mouth, tears starting to leak from my eyes. I felt helpless, alone, and filled with overwhelming despair. Why did everything always have to go to shit? Why did I always end up making things worse? Why couldn't I escape the never-ending stream of misfortune? Please, please don't do this. I screamed, now beating on Russ's chest. And suddenly, in a rush of urgency, Russ's eyes snapped open and he vomited up a great gout of pond water. He coughed and sputtered, emptying his stomach as his body convulsed. I leaned back on my knees, unable to believe it. Relief swept over me as I exhaled, a cackle escaping my lips. "You're alive! Oh my God, you're alive!" I cried, gripping Russ's shoulder as he wiped his mouth and lay on his back. Russ kept his eyes shut, his voice terribly weak. "Hey, Slick. You just can't seem to stay awake, can ya?" "What happened to you? Why is everything different?" Russ tenderly touched his beaten face before answering. "He found me. He found me with you already gone, and he didn't like that." "Who?" I already knew the answer. I jerked my head to the woods, the sound of the drum robbing my attention. "No, not now, please! Not now!" Russ sighed, broken and defeated. "He's coming back to finish the job. And if you're here, he's gonna get you too." The drum was getting louder. I leaned down and grabbed Russ's arm. What does he want? Why is he doing this? Russ closed one eye and looked painfully at me with the other. "He ain't doing this, Jack. You are." My body went cold and I said nothing, my throat going dry. Suddenly, a long rising whistle rose from the forest, first high, then dipping low. The notes bounced off the dark clouds and echoed across the meadow, filling me with dread. Russ tried to sit up, grasping my arm. "You can't keep doing this," he growled, desperation filling his voice. "You can't keep coming here like this. He's gonna kill you." My eyes lined with tears and they spilled down my face. My lips trembled as I looked down at Russ. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I put my hands over my face, sobbing. "Jesus, what have I done?"
"Jackie."
The voice cracked through the air like a clap of thunder and my heart tripped into my ribcage, a flutter of crippling fear spreading across my chest. Another shrieking whistle, a sharp drill in my ears, boring into my skull. The ground shook beneath my feet and I suddenly heard a roar of exploding wood and cracking underbrush from the forest. The sound was distant, but approaching the meadow at a tremendous speed. "The Whistling Man," I whispered, my breath sour on my tongue. I stood up and faced the tree line. Sweat coated my spine with cold fear, and I licked my lips, face pale and gaunt. "Don't let him get you," Russ said from the ground. Tears rained down my cheeks as a cacophony of sound rose around me in a deafening crescendo. I closed my eyes as the drum and constant whistle blasted around me. I could hear trees crashing to the earth as the Whistling Man rocketed towards me from the woods. I felt helpless and terrified. A lone man against a tsunami of power and devastation. The Whistling Man exploded from the tree line and into the meadow. Immediately, everything went silent. My heart counted the seconds against my chest. I squeezed my eyelids shut even tighter. I suddenly felt the presence of someone standing directly in front of me, hot breath on my face.
"Been looking for you, Jackie,"
something said, inches from my face. The voice was a low rumble like thunder in the summer. I kept my eyes firmly shut. My knees were shaken and I felt my bladder release in a rush of terror. My lips quivered and tears dripped down my chin. "Go away," I croaked, my voice a dry rasp. I felt a heavy hand rest on my shoulder, followed by a low chuckle.
"Go away. Ah, Jack. Why would you want that? You brought me here."
I shook my head, squeezing my eyes shut even tighter. "Not anymore."
"Look at me. Open your eyes. Look at what you've created."
"Please, just leave me alone." His hand gripped my chin.
"Open your eyes, Jackie."
Weeping, I slowly pried my bloodshot eyes open and the breath rushed from my lungs in a haunting wave of horror. I was staring into my own face. The Whistling Man grinned as the recognition twisted my face with shock.
"You see, there ain't nothing to be afraid of. This is just who you are."
I took a step back, shaken and trembling. No, this isn't who I am." He chuckled and took a step closer.
"Oh, yes it is, Jack."
I violently shook my head. No, I'm a good person. I'm nothing like you. I'm nothing like you." The Whistling Man suddenly stepped forward and grabbed me by the throat, his grip deadly and impossibly strong.
"It's time we finally settled this, Jackie."
Just leave me alone," I gurgled, as his grip tightened around my throat. He leaned into me, grinning, and squeezed darkness into my vision.
"It's over, Jack."
Stars swam around me and the world began to fade. With one last gasp, I whispered, "Please, just let me go." Right as I was about to pass out, as blackness ate in my eyes, the iron grip around my throat was removed. I gasped and fell to my knees, the meadow rushing back into focus. Color and clarity realigned, and I coughed and sputtered, clutching my aching throat. I looked up in relieved confusion and my eyes went wide. Russ was holding the Whistling Man from behind, one arm wrapped around his throat in a chokehold. He had his other arm over the Whistling Man's face with his hand shoved inside his mouth, gripping the upper jaw with commanding strength. Sweat stood out on Russ's face, his eyes two coals of burning fire. His voice crackled like a blazing furnace. "He don't need you anymore. Leave him alone, damn it." The Whistling Man growled around Russ's hand, fury shaking him.
"I am him."
Russ's neck muscles strained as he began to pull the Whistling Man's head backwards, howling with deafening authority. "Not any More! Screaming with exhausted effort, Russ ripped the whistling man's head back between his shoulder blades in an explosion of blood and bone. I heard a sickening pop as his spine shattered, blood gushing from the now lifeless mouth. Gasping, Russ pulled his bloody hand from the whistling man's jaws and shoved the dead man to the ground. Breathing heavily, he looked at me, chest heaving. "You okay, Slick?" Shock rooted me to the ground, complete disbelief freezing me where I sat. "Jack?" Crying, I got to my feet and embraced him, weeping into his chest. Russ stroked my hair and let me cry into him, his heart beating against me. "Thank you," I wept. "I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry for doing this." Russ pulled me away and took me by the shoulders. "You're a lot stronger than you think, Jack. Never forget that." I wiped tears from my face, unable to stop more from coming. "I won't forget. I promise I won't. Thank you." Russ nodded. "Are you ready to go back?" I nodded, sniffling. Russ closed his eyes. "Good luck to you, Slick. I'm proud of you." And with that, he pushed me backwards, and I awoke with a start on the bar floor. Faces were looking down at me, a blur of color and noise. I blinked, and then everything rushed into focus. It was the bartender and the two men she'd been talking to. Their faces were filled with concern, and I realized they were talking to me. "Hey, you okay?" one of the men asked, getting down on one knee and helping me sit up. Relief washed over me in a suffocating wave, and I grit my teeth as my eyes filled with tears. I smiled up at the three of them, my head clear and focused, all traces of a hangover gone. "I'm all right, thank you. Must have slipped in my stool and bumped my head is all." The bartender told me they had heard a crash and looked over to see me lying on the floor unmoving. She said it had taken them a little bit to wake me up, almost to the point of calling an ambulance. I assured them I was okay, climbing to my feet and brushing myself off. My inexplicable, calm demeanor clearly confused them to the point of not pressing me further. I thanked them for their concern and told them I was going to call a cab and go home. After making sure I was really okay, they told me to take care of myself. I smiled. I will. That was 3 years ago. It's been a long, hard road since that night, but I'm doing well. It took months for my wife to get over that horrific act of selfishness, but I've proven to her since then that I will never be that man again. I can't believe she didn't leave me, and it fills me with eternal gratitude. I spent this time proving to my family that they can rely on me. I've shown them my resolve, and we've grown closer, making it through those horrible early months of uncertainty. But we're stronger now, and life has begun to show promise of happiness. I did end up losing my job, but my boss was able to secure me another with a sister company. It was an act of kindness I wasn't expecting, and it furthered me down the path of positivity. It's taken 3 years to rebuild my life to a point of hesitant optimism. And it's been 3 years since I had a drink. I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you it was easy, because it wasn't. It was hard. Impossibly hard. Even after everything I went through. There were days I almost gave in to the temptation, but I would open up to my wife during those times of weakness, and she got me through them. She gave me hope that I could change. but I had to face what I had become first. And I will never go back to being that man. I'll find my own way to the meadow. I know it's out there, waiting for me. The path to its peaceful serenity growing more clear the longer I walk the road of recovery. And even though I've come so far and made so much progress, I'm still filled with fear. Because I know he's out there waiting for me. He'll always be there. The Whistling Man. I love to write. I love to write horror in particular. There's something about the creative freedom it allows, the flexible walls of reality you're allowed to bend. It's a place where you can put down your darkest thoughts or wildest ideas. It's a space you enter with no light, no sound, and there's already blood on the walls. Horror is a sticky, upsetting ordeal where you engage in a contract with the author that gives him or her permission to get inside your mind and rip out your insecurities by the gory handfuls. As scary as it can be to experience these things as a reader, it's worse for the author. Imagine taking your most demented thoughts, examining them, asking why they're in your mind, and then placing them on a platform for the world to see. You present it under the white light of a blank page and then bleed its twisted black blood into words. You craft monsters and motives with the sickest intentions. You breathe life into characters you plan on tearing apart. You give these people families, loved ones, all of which you intend to destroy. You become a fictional god of death, a puppet master with knives for fingers, slicing them over your keyboard in brutal strokes of cruelty. I don't write this to promote what I do. I don't do this for some kind of warped respect. And there is no honor in becoming a psychopath for the duration of a story. There is no glory in holding out the broken remains of your characters for the world to see. Horror is a disturbing business. A cold and lonely road with no happy ending. I'm sure there are those out there that turn their nose down at it. And why not? It's developed a bad reputation over the years. Recycled ideas, cheap scares, girls with black eyes, and cryptic messages. We're all familiar with the cliches. We've all seen the steady decline of fresh content. We've all groaned as the big reveal unfolded, and it turned out they were dead the whole time. Now, I have no misconceptions. I'm not going to change the horror world. I'm not going to think of an idea that is so revolutionary it will flip the way we think about horror on its head. I'm not going to come up with a plot so incredible that publishers are going to throw piles of money at me. No. I'm here to tell you that I've found the end of that long, dark road. I've found where it leads, tracked my steps with an anxious mind, and come out the other side. I've seen where horror can take you. And I'm here to tell you just how far you can go. I stared at my computer screen with numb eyes. I cursed the blinking slice of black on the blank page. I willed it to move, begged it to take the first steps of my new story. If I could just get a paragraph down, I knew I'd be able to slip into the comfortable flow of a moving narrative. I racked my brain, scrambling for the words to start my dark tale. I needed to write, but my mind stubbornly refused to communicate ideas to my fingers. The space between my ears soared into the demented realm of terror, desperately clawing at possible entries into this new endeavor. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I had written so many of these things. Never had I suffered such crippling writer's block, and the mountain of immovable cliches threatened to suffocate me with the mundane. I'd already tried the usual brain stimulation, long car rides with loud music, sitting in the dark while chain smoking, watching my favorite horror movies. Nothing seemed to tickle that muscle in my head that sparked my supply of spooks and scares. I sat up in my chair and ashed my cigarette into an empty beer bottle. I took one last drag, and then shoved the butt down the neck of the bottle, listening to it sizzle in the dregs. I pulled another one from my pack and lit it, begging the nicotine to ignite my mind into action. Smoke rose from my lips in waves of indifference, and I rubbed my face in frustration. I wanted to do something big, something that no one had done before. I wanted to create a name for myself in the world of horror, a legacy that remained long after I did. I just wanted to write. I had done fairly well for myself in my recent literary excursions, building a small following in some online communities. Most of the feedback was positive, which, in turn, fueled my desire to do something bigger and better, really give my readers something that would wow them. It's the dream every young author goes through when they first start out. But then the ideas begin to fizzle, and you burn through all your good material, much like an aging comedian, but, with less gore and severed heads. I took another drag from my cigarette and drummed my fingers on the desk. Maybe I had nothing left. Maybe I had exhausted all my ideas and now was left with nothing but fresh takes on old ideas. It was discouraging, frightening. What if the inspiration I had so passionately begun this journey with was now diminishing into the frayed remains of worn-out tropes? No, I couldn't accept that. I had so much more to offer, so much more to give. There was a black fire in me that I hadn't revealed yet. There was a hunger buried in me I hadn't yet explored. I lived with it my whole life, shielded myself from it, denied it. But it was there, and it burned hotter with each day. The more I immersed and dedicated myself to all things horror, the more I wanted to push the limits. With each successful story, I was fueled to take the reader to darker and darker places. And in doing so, I felt my hunger expand and rise, its gaping jaws begging for forbidden flavor. I knew where I was headed. I knew what I wanted to do. Ah, damn it, I muttered, stubbing out my cigarette and pulling up my web browser. I needed to do something about this intolerable writer's block and find some way to get the wheels turning. I browsed a couple of my favorite horror sites, flicking through the images and articles with eyes that weren't really paying attention. I had done this in the past, and I felt like I'd squeezed all the juice of possibility from these pages. Today, I needed to delve deeper. I had played around on the dark web before, the hidden internet behind the internet. Today, I was going to immerse myself in it, really soak my mind in its twisted machinations. It didn't take long to find some hidden sites. I'd been here before. I knew the channels I had to take to reveal the shadow of the surface webcast. The one I was currently on seemed to be a black market Craigslist. As I scanned the page, I saw an assortment of items on sale, ranging from hardcore drugs to murder. This tickled my interest, and I clicked on an ad that boasted, "Hitman for hire." I quickly read the summary of the services offered and chuckled to myself. This couldn't be real, could it? Apparently, this guy would kill anyone you wanted for 10,000 euros. Like I said earlier, I had been on the deep web before, but not like this. I had merely dipped my toe into the cesspool, a curious peek beneath the curtain. Back then, when I had first started writing, darker issues scared me. Not personally, of course, but professionally. I was worried about the content I was confessing. I didn't want to allow my readers to wander too deeply inside my mind. But now I felt like maybe I could. I felt like I had gained enough confidence in my craft to shine a little honesty on my stories. I wanted to illuminate the black corners of my thoughts and create stories I'd only fantasized about before. I wanted to shock them, throw them down the dark hole of my mind and see if they could survive. I idled on the page a while longer, my interest dwindling. After exhausting my patience, I decided to check out a site one of my friends had talked about a few months ago. Apparently it was a snuff site, a place where you could watch real people being killed. I pulled out my phone and sent my friend a quick text. As I awaited for his response, I mentally prepared myself for what I was hopefully going to see. I had never actually seen anyone killed before. What better way to stimulate the mind? I didn't know why I hadn't thought of it earlier. It excited me, a nervous anticipation for the horror I was about to experience. How would I react? Would I be disgusted by it? Would I be able to handle it? How far could I push myself? My phone chirped and I smiled to myself as I read the message. My fingers raced to the keyboard, and soon I was staring at a red and black website. In bloody font were the titles of literally hundreds of snuff films. I sat there with my mouse hovering over the top video link. I paused. Did I really want to go down this road? You've known for months this is where you were headed. I smiled and clicked the video. The screen faded to black and then showed two middle-aged men on their knees. Their hands were bound behind their backs and one of the men was wearing a straw hat. It looked like there was a barn behind them, its red wall a foretelling of the violence to come. For some reason, I was surprised to see it was being shot in the daylight. I leaned in closer to my screen, licking my lips, eyes lighting up. From the corner of the screen, another man walked into the shot. He was holding a knife and he went and stood behind the man with the hat. Without a word, he grabbed the man by the hair and began slicing into his throat. My heart jumped into my mouth and I audibly gasped, gripping the sides of my chair. I couldn't believe how much blood there was. To my shock, the victim wasn't screaming. He curled his chin down to his chest in an attempt to escape the blade, his mouth opening and closing in silent agony. The other man turned his head away, his mouth forming a thin, grim line. The man holding the knife stopped cutting and tilted the victim's head the other way. He placed the bloody blade on the untouched side of his neck and began to saw inward towards the throat from the opposite side. I watched in complete fascination. After a few seconds, the executioner hit bone and I could see his muscles bulge with effort as he struggled to sever the head. With a tearing sound, he finally managed to rip it from the body. He held it up for the camera to see and then tossed it to the side. And then he started on the other man. My heart was racing in my chest as I watched a repeat of what had just happened. My tongue slid between my lips as I concentrated on every detail, drinking it in. I realized that very few people had ever seen what I was now seeing. As the thought rippled across my mind, I shivered with excitement. Once the video was over, I grabbed a cigarette and lit it with trembling fingers. I gasped down the smoke and couldn't help but smile, my eyes alight with wonderment. I had just seen someone die. I had just watched a human being executed. I hastily clicked on another video, and then another, and another, and another. I couldn't stop watching them. and the morbid stage before me was an untapped vein of shock and brutality that I had never experienced before. It was like having sex for the first time. The surprise of euphoric pleasure blocking out everything else. I wanted more of it. Wanted to repeat the experience over and over again. Each time bringing with it new and undiscovered ways of enjoyment. Hours rolled by. My state of consciousness completely enveloped by this new pastime. I continued to chain smoke, eyes held captive by the vicious images displayed on the screen. I indulged my mind with video after video, a starving glutton for the raw violence. I could feel my mind digesting it all in voluminous chunks, a carnivore for carnage. Before I knew it, the sun had set and was rising again. The magnificent beauty of its spanning color a contrast to the depraved, pernicious image. I stared out the window, blinking as the creeping light crept over the horizon. My mind was fatigued, enervated by the monstrosities I had witnessed. I rubbed my hands over my eyes, pulling sleep from them like cobwebs. Good grief, I muttered to no one. My life began to develop a predictable pattern after that night. I would go to work, come home, and watch hours and hours of Snuff. I would close the curtains, smack a cigarette from my pack, and dive back into the deep web. It was all I ever craved. After a couple weeks, it was all I could think about. I floated through my days, working my day job in a dreamlike state, and then rushing home to repeat the cycle. The more videos I watched, the more my hunger grew. I felt something emerging from inside of me. The deep darkness I had kept hidden for so long. It crept out from its lair and began to fill me, its long tendrils coiling around my mind in an obsessive grip. After a couple months, I began to seek out more graphic material, tearing the internet apart for the highest quality videos. I wanted to find the bottom of the well, the absolute peak of human cruelty. I ignored the moral warnings that occasionally shot from my subconscious, pushing away the fragile arguments that bubbled to the surface. And just when I thought I had reached the end of the road, just when I began to wonder if I had seen everything there was to see, I found them. I found red rooms. It was almost an accident, my finding them. I was chasing a link down an endless rabbit hole when I found myself on a site I'd only dreamed existed. After a few minutes of excited exploration, I realized that what I was looking at was a live stream. A couple feet from the camera was a man bound to a chair. He was weeping and seemed to have given up hope of escape. On the sidebar, there was a list of items with price tags next to them. Hammer, $500. Crowbar, $300. Blowtorch, $600. Hacksaw, $900. And the list went on and on. I couldn't believe it. I could buy instruments to torture this man? Is that what I was looking at? Just the thought sent a shiver of raw excitement run down my spine. Who was watching this right now? How many people were sitting at their computers pondering this man's suffering? There was a timer at the top of the screen that read 3:17 and was counting down. Below the clock was a list of items that had already been purchased by the unseen viewers. My eyes ate up the instruments of agony, and I felt a smile slowly stretch my face. I was going to see this man crawl to his death, ripped apart piece by piece in a grand showing of live Snuff theater. I pulled my feet up on my chair and lit a cigarette, watching as the clock gradually counted down to 0. When it did, The numbers faded and a graphic of a round green light lit up the next video feed. 2 men entered the screen wearing ski masks. And then they began to torture the bound man, working their way down the list of purchased tools, and I couldn't get enough of it. This marked another turning point in my life. From then on, I became infatuated with red rooms. I found out when they were being streamed, usually every 3 weeks or so, and managed to save enough money to purchase an instrument of torture at every live event. The first time I did it was breathtaking. I spent $200 for a pint of bleach and watched, absorbed into the sick display as they slowly dripped it into the man's open eyes. The thrill of knowing I was responsible for his screams excited me in ways I had only dreamed possible. I felt an energy rush through my body as a diadem of darkness settled over my mind. I wanted to do more, spend more, stretch the limits of pain into realms unreached. Weeks rolled into months, my money squandered away and saved until the next live stream. It was all I thought about, all I wanted. What little social life I had faded to nothing. I didn't talk to anyone outside of work, didn't go out, didn't seek out company or companions. Death and snuff were all I wanted, all I thought about. It was the only thing that stimulated me, the only thing that got my heart racing. Now, I didn't worship death. I didn't think the world needed to be eradicated. I didn't hold a grudge against humanity. I wasn't angry at society. I just found all of this absolutely enthralling. The unflinching act of what I watched, the splash of human blood, the screams of a person in agony. It was all so real. It was unfiltered human suffering boiled down to its most basic form. All thoughts of writing were gone. I tried once, but gave up after half a page. How was it possible to describe such savage acts? How could I translate the howls of pain into black and white? How could I describe the way a person's body sums when they finally go out? But I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't heartbroken. I didn't think it had anything to do with my skill as a writer. I began to understand that some things could not be appreciated unless seen. No matter how bad an author might want you to experience what they envision, what they see, sometimes it is simply impossible. It's like trying to write down how music sounds. You can describe the instruments, explain the beat and rhythm, the ups and downs. But at the end of the day, you simply cannot hear the music. A year passed. I continued in my ways, scraping by, saving, waiting, and then finally purchasing machines of death as a new victim was procured. Looking back, I have a hard time forming concrete memories of that year. Everything was so similar, every day so robotic. During the weekends, I would hole up in my apartment and watch and rewatch snuff films, filling my mind until the next live stream. I was a slave to the violence. It remained fresh and new each time I witnessed it. My mind never numbed to it. The blade of its cruelty never dulled. And then the opportunity of a lifetime emerged from the depths of the deep web. Right around the 1-year mark of my new obsession, I was contacted by the hosts of the Live Snuff channel. They sent a direct message to my account, and when I saw it, my heart began to race. They said they had noticed my loyalty to their work. They said they appreciated all the money I had donated to their bloody productions. They said I was an inspiration to the art of snuff, a true patriot to the darker side of life. And they asked if I wanted to participate in a live event. I had to reread the message 4 times before I was convinced that I wasn't dreaming. Could this actually be real? Were they really inviting me to go and partake in their live shoot? It was too good to be true. The thrill of possibility overwhelming me. I sat back in my chair, staring at the message on my screen. After a moment, I slid a cigarette between my teeth and smoked the entire thing while in a trance-like state. Finally, I placed my trembling hands on the keyboard and replied. I told them I would be honored to be a part of their work and asked for the details and date. I asked what I needed to bring or do to prepare. I asked what they wanted of me. It wasn't long before I had a new message. Licking my lips, I opened it. My breath left my body in a rush of adrenaline. They were offering the spot of executioner to me. 3 weeks went by in a rush of excited impatience. I couldn't stop role-playing the eventual scene in my mind. I was going to take someone's life. I was going to star in a snuff. I would finally be able to enact these dark fantasies that had been dominating my thoughts for the past year. Time and time again, I pictured myself sliding a knife between someone's ribs or strangling them with my bare hands. I didn't hold any malice in my heart. It was just an overwhelming sense of curiosity. I didn't think about the victim's past or the fact that they were alive and I would make them dead. I would be the one who would feel their life leave their body. I would be their end. And the more I thought about it, the more I knew I could do it. There was no question there. Not once did I pause and ponder my ability to kill. This is what had been growing inside of me since my humble beginnings. I had always known it was there, this morbid hunger. I did wonder what would happen afterward. Obviously, these were dangerous people I was dealing with. Obviously, they were professionals in their craft. I could tell just by the quality of their shoots, the lighting, the set, the clean design of the website. Everything pointed to a small-time organization that had a very good system running, and somehow they all kept it under the radar. As I pondered these things, ideas began to grow in my mind. One of these ideas was a need to protect myself in case anything went sideways. I decided that I would slip a small knife inside my shoe in case I found myself in a less than desirable situation. I was told to meet them outside of town by an abandoned warehouse around 11 at night. From there, they would transport me to the spot of the shoot and we'd begin filming. When it was done, they would drive me back to my car and I'd be on my way. I knew it was dangerous and a huge risk to my personal safety. But it was such a rare opportunity, I decided it was worth it. I was at the point in my obsession that I needed to take that last step. I needed to extend beyond just viewing. I needed to partake in it. I needed to feel it. I needed to hear the music. I needed to see the color. That's how I found myself in a van 3 weeks later with the bag over my head. I was nervous, feeling the road bounce beneath me. The knife in my shoe felt hard under my foot, a solid reminder of my insurance in case this went wrong. I had driven to the instructed location and waited a half an hour for the black van to arrive. I was a mess of nerves and emotions, unable to believe that the time had finally come. I had spent so much time imagining this moment, I couldn't fathom that it was actually happening. Only one man had been sent to retrieve me, someone my age in his early 20s. He seemed incredibly casual about the whole thing, shaking my hand upon arrival and apologizing for the bag over my head. I told him I understood as the rough cloth was pulled over my face. It's not like he tied my hands or anything, just asked that I keep the bag on until we arrived. As we drove, I told him I was surprised they had reached out to me. I heard him chuckle and say that sometimes, as an incentive to keep watching the live streams, they'd allow dedicated viewers to perform the executions. He said I probably hadn't noticed in the past, as each person was required to wear a black jacket and a ski mask that they provided. He said they would have contacted me sooner, but they hadn't traveled out my way in some time. Obviously, they moved around a lot, and when they were in my neck of the country, they decided it was time to extend a hand. I told him I greatly appreciated the opportunity and silently felt a little uneasy that they knew where I lived. Eventually, after about an hour, we came to a stop and I was allowed to remove my mask. I blinked and scrubbed my eyes, letting them settle on my surroundings. We had stopped at another abandoned warehouse, this one much larger than the one I've been picked up at. It was surrounded by swaying trees that danced in the moonlight. A gentle breeze filled the air. The man who drove me got out of the van and motioned for me to do the same. Gravel crunched under my feet as I followed him towards the looming superstructure. It was a mess of broken brick and jutting steel beams, a relic long forgotten by time and man. I felt the wind rustle through my hair and I breathed in the quiet night. I could tell by the inky sky just how far they were from any kind of civilization. We passed a few parked cars and then entered the silent ribcage of broken construction. It was dark, the way lit only by the glowing moon. The man leading me seemed to know where we were going and told me over his shoulder that we were shooting in the basement. I stumbled over loose rubble and stayed close to my guide, feeling the pull of excitement tugging me. I followed him down some wide stairs, being careful not to trip, and saw lights at the bottom. We reached the basement and I was overcome with a sense of awe. Sitting in the middle of the vast open basement was a man bound and gagged to a chair. His head slumped to his chest and I could tell he was unconscious. Surrounding him were stage lights, set up and connected to a running generator. They were spaced out to light the scene, but far enough that they wouldn't make it into the live stream. 2 men were set up 10 feet from the bound man, an array of wires and boom mics entangling their space. One man had an expensive-looking camera mounted on a tripod and was testing its functionality in frames, while the other man placed multiple mics around the lights. Both men barely looked up at me, their scruffy faces indifferent to my arrival. The last man turned to me and came to meet us at the bottom of the stairs, a big smile on his face. He was about 30 years old and had a hollow look around his eyes. His face was gaunt and pale, but not sickly. He looked like someone who had seen hell and decided to make the most of it. He shook my hand and dismissed the driver to go back to the van and wait for me to come back up when the deed was done. I watched him go, a sense of wonder filling me. This was actually going to happen. I was really going to do this. "You nervous?" the man asked, still smiling and gripping my hand. I shook my head. "I just can't believe you're actually letting me do this. I can't help but wonder what the catch is." The man snorted. "No catch, man. Just a way of saying thank you for all the money you put into our little illegal operation. And no one cares who's doing the actual killing, just so long as the viewers get to see their tools used. Why not give back to the community, you know? Let someone live out a fantasy." I looked at him. "Is that what this is to you? A fantasy?" I saw his eyes grow distant and his tone shifted slightly. "It used to be. I had a partner who enjoyed this more than me, but, well, things didn't end up working out. I see this as a sickness I live with. I can't make it go away. It can't stop my need to kill people. At one point in my life, I almost killed myself over it, but eventually I learned to live with it. And then I learned how to make a profit from it. Work with the gifts God gave you, am I right? I nodded, feeling things cement in my mind. He pointed to a workbench at the far end of the basement. Over there is the tools you'll use as they come up on the laptop. I'll be standing over there off screen to instruct you which ones the viewers are purchased and in what order to use them. Now, it's essential not to kill this man until we reach the end of the shoot, okay? I know this is exciting and all, but I'm going to be seriously pissed off if he dies before we're done with the list. I felt the hunger seize my stomach. Ideas exploded in my mind like fireworks. I understand. You don't have anything to worry about. I was born for this. He slapped my back. Glad to hear it. I've seen men change their mind once they're actually here, but you? I can tell you're here to see this to the end. I can see the lust in your eyes. I've seen it before. I can tell you're a killer. I can tell you're the worst kind of monster. I could feel a cold darkness swallow me up. I won't let you down. You ready to get started? I smiled. I think this is going to mark the beginning of a whole new life for me. The man turned to the two techs and shouted instructions for them to get set. They seemed bored by the whole thing, a familiar irritation I had seen in others. I got the feeling they didn't like their boss very much. Good. I joined the director by the workbench and watched as the sound guy went to the bound man and slapped him awake. He groaned around his gag, and then his eyes lit up with fear as he realized where he was. He began to scream, the sound muted by the dirty cloth in his mouth. I wondered who he was, where they had scooped him up. I knew they must be incredibly careful with who they chose, scoping out potential victims and tracking them for weeks. The infrastructure for such an operation was impressive. The director opened up a laptop on the workbench and pulled up the familiar website. As he got the list of torture devices in order, I ran my hands over the array of tools splayed out before me. My fingers brushed over the cold steel, the possibilities of each one alluring me to its grip. I smiled, my mind set. There was only one way this was going to go. There was no turning back now. Okay, the director said, eyeing the screen. Wow, it looks like the first one up on the list is a chainsaw. He turned to me. Now be careful with this one, don't get carried away. Maybe cut up his legs a little bit, hack off an ear. Nothing fatal or too bloody. This is a tricky one to start with. We have a lot more to go, okay? I spotted the massive weapon on the floor by my feet and picked it up, gripping it with sure hands. This is a fantastic choice, I said, smiling. Good, now here, put these on, he said, pulling out from beneath the workbench a black jacket and ski mask. I bent and scooped them up, my wardrobe for the performance. I pulled the ski mask over my face and was pleasantly surprised at the freshly washed aroma. The jacket was a little big, but I dutifully buttoned it up and tested the stiffness, flexing my range. Satisfied, I nodded at the director. The director cupped his hands to his mouth. Okay, you two, ready? They gave him a thumbs up. My heart thundered in my chest, and I felt a mass of energy fill me, a pulsing excitement. I stared at the man in the chair, my eyes meeting his, and I saw helpless fear reflect back in me. He was crying, struggling against his restraints, desperately trying to free himself from the waking nightmare. Go live, the director yelled, bringing his hand down in a chopping motion. I hefted the chainsaw in my hands, its steel blade begging to be brought to life. My eyes never left the man in the chair as I approached the circle of stage lights. From the darkness I came, bringing with me tools of death. How appropriate, how fitting, that the light would expose just how stained I had become. I stood just outside the circle of light and put the chainsaw down to rev it. I glanced at the two techs and they seemed bored. One of them with his eye on the camera, and the other hovering over a laptop that was plugged into some kind of circuit board. I gripped the pulley and yanked it, giving the viewers an unseen preview of what was coming. The small engine growled from the black and then sputtered back to life. I pulled the string a couple more times, but the engine always faltered back into silence. The cameraman looked up at me and twirled his fingers at me, annoyed. "Hurry up." I glanced over my shoulder and saw the director coming to help me. He seemed irritated. He shoved me to the side, flicked the switch and gripped the cord. He yanked it once and the chainsaw screamed to life. The man in the chair was weeping, shaking profusely, his bloodshot eyes full of unimaginable horror. "Thanks," I said. "It's been a pleasure working with you. Time to do this." I suddenly grabbed the director and shoved him towards the man in the chair. Surprised and caught off guard, he tumbled forward into the view of the camera. He tripped into the bound man but caught himself as a chair rocked from the collision. The two techs looked up from their work, confused as to what was happening. As the director turned to face me, his eyes shining with confused anger, I stepped into the halo of light, grinning like a madman. In one swift motion, I drove the chainsaw into the director's stomach, muscles straining as I lifted his body up into the screaming blade. Blood and flesh exploded onto my mask in waves of grisly carnage, the warm fluid coating the fabric with streaks of gore. The director's mouth was open in a silent howl, blood running down his chin as the chainsaw chewed up his insides. He made the mistake of grabbing the churning blade, desperate to remove the source of agony. His fingers were shred in a splash of blood and bone as one of his thumbs was whizzed off into the darkness. I gave the chainsaw some more juice and tilted the blade down, letting my victim slide to the ground in a pool of his own innards. He looked up at me, confusion painting his face as he screamed, unable to believe what I had done. I didn't hesitate. I brought the chainsaw down and severed his head. And it felt good. Blood gushed onto the dirty floor, spouts of thick red pooling around the dead body. I bent down and picked up the head by the hair, the snarling chainsaw in my other hand. I stepped towards the camera and shoved the mutilated face into the lens. "You see this? You see what I did to this man?" I yelled into the camera. The two techs were frozen with disbelief, unmoving as shock held them still. I lowered the head and looked directly into the lens. This was the man behind the show you all enjoy so much. He constructed this bloody theater, built a foundation of entertainment around his own violent tastes. I suddenly smiled into the camera. But I'm in charge now. From now on, I call the shots. I understand your need for this. I splayed my hands out of the bloody floor. I understand your desire to partake in this gory display of death. I used to be just like you, sitting behind my computer, paying for tools of torture. I'm not here to change that. In fact, I'm going to make it easier. I'm going to lower the price on the site. I'm going to host more events, and I'm going to raise the quality of what you're paying for. I want to give you the performance you deserve. I took a step back and raised my arms. As a sign of goodwill, I'll refund all of your money for today's little hiccup. I understand that this wasn't what you expected to see today. I apologize for that. And I'll be in touch with all of you very soon. I looked up from the camera at the two tech guys. Shut it down. They didn't move. I revved the chainsaw I was holding. I said, shut it the fuck down. The cameraman scrambled in a panic and the red light on the camera went off. Neither of them moved, just stared at me, waiting for me to make a move or say something. They seemed terrified, the disruption of their practice routine rattling their senses into shock. "How much did he pay you?" I asked, throwing a thumb over my shoulder at the headless body. The sound guy licked his lips and fought to get himself under control. I found his fear almost comical when examining his line of work. $2,000 a shoot," he finally managed to mumble. I looked at the cameraman. "Same for you?" He nodded. I shut off the chainsaw and tossed it to the side. "I'll double that if you stay and work for me. All I ask is that you show me the ropes of this business. Get me up to speed on running the site, who the contacts are, how you scope out the victims. If you do that, I'll give you $4,000 a shoot. Each. I know you're probably shocked I just cut your boss's head off, but I promise you don't have to worry about me acting out again. That was a necessary action I needed to make in order to get my foot in the door. So what do you say? Are you ready to help me build the most successful snuff site on the deep web?" The two men looked at each other, and I saw a silent conversation pass between their eyes. After a second, they turned back to me. "We're in." I smiled. Fantastic. I turned around and walked to the man in the chair. He had been silent throughout the whole ordeal, but now that my attention was on him, he began to whimper, unsure of what I had in store for him. I squat down in front of him and looked up into his eyes. I reached up and placed my hand over his chest, causing him to cry out and squirm away from my touch. "Your heart is beating so fast," I said softly. I reached up and pulled the gag from his mouth. The man gasped in lungfuls of air and ran his tongue over his teeth, grateful to be free of the cloth. "Please, I'll do whatever you want. Please don't kill me," he bumbled, fresh tears pouring from his eyes. I pinched his cheek and smiled. "Don't worry, buddy. It's your lucky day. Your old product, a relic from previous management. I have no use for you. Unless..." I cocked my head. "Unless you want to come work for me?" His eyes grew wide, and I could tell he was struggling to find an answer that wouldn't end in bloodshed. I shook my head. Forget it. Don't worry about it. You're not cut out for this kind of life. Go home. You're free to leave." I reached into my shoe and retrieved the knife from under my foot. I cut the man's ropes and pulled him from the chair. I dug into my pocket and fished out my wallet. I handed the man the $200 in 20s and told him to give it to the driver who was waiting upstairs. "Tell him to take you home. Tell him the boss said so." The man looked up at me like he couldn't believe it. I couldn't blame the poor bastard. "You're not gonna go to the police about this little misunderstanding, are you?" I asked. He shook his head violently. "Good. Now get out of here," I said, pushing him towards the stairs. As I watched him go, I felt a calm settle over me. This is where I was supposed to be. This is what I was supposed to be doing. I felt that familiar darkness stir inside of me and flow down my body and out my fingertips. Finally free after years of suppression. I was finally whole. I felt like I could finally breathe after years of suffocation. I had a lot to learn. A dangerous and haunting road ahead of me. I had taken a huge risk doing what I did, but a necessary one. Before I came to this place, I had made up my mind that I was going to try and take over this business. My hunger of late had grown to a point of uncontrollable lust, and I knew this was the only way I could live with it. I was ready for the challenge, excited to take the first steps in my new life. I was determined to build the most successful snuff site the internet had ever seen. I was going to revolutionize the word torture. I was going to bring a whole new meaning to it. I was going to build a kingdom around me. A kingdom I would rule. I was going to build an empire of death.